but I'm still up on the roof, so it's.
Okay. Okay. With that, I will look to the agenda. Public question period. There are no public questions. I'll call the meeting to order. Any changes, additions to the agenda? Did you want to say something?
Just to bring your mic closer to you, please.
Oh, beg pardon. Sorry, all. No changes to the agenda. I'll move the agenda be approved as presented. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. Looking to the minutes of the Tuesday, June 19th meeting of council. Are there errors or omissions? Seeing none, I'll move the minutes be adopted as presented. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. Skipping on down to item G1, Elevation Place Mold Remediation Funding. Mr. Hannes.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and members of council. Thank you for accepting this report. As you're aware, we've been working with an operational item at Elevation Place for a number of months. We identified some mold that was growing underneath one section of lockers in one of the change rooms, and upon further investigation discovered that the mold had been growing on a wood base underneath the male and female change rooms, and needed to get remediated. So through our investigations, we've developed a plan to remediate the mold and protect the public and our staff and contractors alike. The plan is to remove the lockers and replace the structural bases with concrete and fully remediate it with a professional crew that has hazmat training during the pool shutdown to minimize disturbance to the public. We have released this on APC to try to garner as much interest from the market as possible. However, we only did receive 2 bids to do the work. We estimate that the project will cost about $50,000, and we feel that this exceeds the capacity for our facility's operational budget to absorb. So today we are requesting for $50,000 in funding from the General Operating Reserve to help us remediate this project. We feel this is an important health and safety project to implement this fall. And I'll be happy to take any questions if you have them.
Thank you very much. I'm not seeing a whole lot of people reaching for their buttons. I don't know if there are any questions. Pretty straightforward. Understand Gibbs Gage, who were the original architects, had provided the alternate design options pro bono. Is that right?
Correct.
Great. Yeah, a bit of a surprise to find that in a new building, but good to find it and deal with it.
That's right.
I have no questions to your report. Does anybody else? Councillor Sanford?
Thank you, Worship. Thank you for that update. Mr. Hannes, so the pool shutdown is in September?
Correct.
So this condition can carry on until then?
Yeah, last December we conducted a thorough investigation to determine a number of answer a number of questions, and one of which was what's the extent of the mold in the facility. And so we removed the lockers in a variety of change rooms, and it's in those 2 locations. And so at that time we treated the mold and to prevent its spread and that sort of thing. So that's what we did to contain it.
So the rebuild is what you're proposing for September, but there has been some remediation on the site already?
That's right.
Okay. Good. Thank you.
If there's no further questions, thank you very much for your report.
You're welcome.
I'll move that council approve mold remediation work in the male and female change rooms at Elevation Place, valued at $50,000 to be funded from the General Operating Reserve. Speaking to the motion, I'll be happy to support this direction. Surprising, as I said a few minutes ago, surprising to have something like that turn up in a fairly new building, but things happen. We'll just deal with it, move on. See no further discussion, I'll call the question. Those in favor, opposed, motion's carried unanimously. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
With that, we'll move on to item G2, the 2018 FireSmart grant funded projects. Deputy Chief Martins or Chief Scholar? No. Deputy Chief.
Hello, good evening, Mayor and Councillors. Thanks for your time this evening. I'm here on behalf of the Greater Protective Services Department with a request for a decision as detailed on page 10 of your agenda package. At the end of May, we received word that we had been awarded 2 FRIA grants for the upcoming season. The first, vegetation management, follows recommendation number 2 that was approved in the wildfire mitigation strategy. The map for that is outlined on page 11 of your package. The second grant for wildland urban interface cross-training follows with recommendation number 10 in the strategy. And the interesting thing about that project, it'll allow us for testing of perimeter sprinkler lines, but it'll also allow us to do some cross-training with our mutual aid partners in the wildland urban interface. There are remaining grant funding. There are remaining grant funds from 2 previous FRIA grants. And plans are in place to use that funding up by the end of 2018, by the end of this year. There are no additional financial impacts other than what's already been approved for. So if you have any questions, I'd be happy to try to answer those for you.
Thank you very much. So under the capital project 1411, you note that some of those unused funds might be used to investigate where the second pass vegetation management is required. So that's the orange zones that are on the map.
It is.
Yeah. Have we done any investigation of that so far?
I don't believe so.
No.
Stu has been, there is a, Stu Walkinshaw has been doing some work on it, and from my understanding, the 1411 capital project extra funding will be used for either or vegetation or additional vegetation management, or to look and investigate whether the stuff that has already been done needs to be redone, or if the better use of that funding would be to create additional fuel breaks.
Great. And the project that we're speaking about this evening, the perimeter sprinkler lines, just curious, I recall, I think it was Mr. Burt was talking with us at some point about the two choices. There was a high volume and a low volume line, different approach. And so with this project, would we be testing out one or the other, or both?
I'm not sure. Both? Both.
Both. Good answer.
Thank you.
Yeah, it'd be kind of interesting to see.
Yeah, it would be a really interesting project.
And as I understand, the high volume requires contractor to be involved.
Yes.
So then for this test, that's what will happen.
Mm-hmm.
Great.
Yeah.
I don't have any other questions. Are there questions from other members of council? Seeing none, thanks very much for your report.
Thank you.
With that, I'll move the council approve a new capital project for 2018 FireSmart projects in the amount of $135,000 to be funded by the Forest Resource Improvement Association of Alberta grants. Speaking to the motion, always happy to support a motion that improves our community safety, which this will. So it's great to see that unexpected funding come forward and help us to move forward more quickly on our fire smarting. No further discussion on the motion. Call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. Thank you.
Thank you.
Moving on then to item G3, the community event policy. Ms. Bartolome, going to be that quick with you?
I'm glad I was here early. You guys are quick today.
Now I know your password. It's ...
Yeah, that's it. Mr. Mayor, members of council, I'm here today seeking approval for the revised community event policy, and I'm recommending that council approve a 3-year fee implementation plan for the Canmore Folk Music Festival, the Canmore Highland Games, the Rundle Mountain Cycling Club, and the Canmore Rocky Mountain Half Marathon. The aim of community event policy is to provide administration with a framework to ensure that the provision of community events and associated road closures build community, enhance quality of life for residents and visitors, and that it's all done in a fiscally responsible way. The revised policy before you today provides administration with a tool to make fair, equitable, transparent, and consistent event approval and fee-for-service decisions, and it establishes the conditions under which roads and public places will be closed and managed for event or film purposes. As event applications and tourism traffic increases, So has the need for a comprehensive policy that addresses operational impacts, including road closures and cost recovery. The revised policy states, the approval for community events and film permits will be based on principles intended to build community, enhance quality of life for residents and visitors, and provide appropriate and fair pricing. The purpose of this policy is to establish the criteria that will be used in the community event and film permit approval process, to establish the community event classification and associated fee structure for cost recovery purposes, to provide administration with a tool to make fair, equitable, transparent, and consistent approval and fee for service decisions, and to establish the conditions under which roads and public places will be closed and managed for community events or film productions. Administration brought a draft community event policy to council for input at the June Committee of the Whole meeting. One of the questions that was asked about was the Towards Zero Waste plan and its role in events. The Towards Zero Waste policy was rescinded as part of the policy update work that was done by the last council because the Towards Zero Waste requirements were embedded in the previous community events policy. Administration has added the wording on Towards Zero Waste and other requirements from the previous policy to the revised policy in section 7.2 under administrative responsibilities, and they're listed here on the slide. So it's Towards Zero Waste, emergency response plans, road right-of-way usage permits, Alberta Health Services approval, site and parking plans, insurance, permits, and licensing requirements. Our success of attracting and growing events has resulted in natural growth pressures stretching town operations, community infrastructure and resources, and volunteer resources. Several changes have occurred in event delivery to manage these pressures since the 2014 event review. It started with an event forum where we brought event groups in to find out what they wanted from us. What kinds of things did they need to learn? What could we do collectively? And we want to continue to do summits into the future. We already offer flag person training to events and other things to build capacity within those events. The other things that we have done, we have established a community event committee in 2015, and that committee has looked at event applications as they've come in. They have helped us, they've advised on policy and procedures, and and they've just acted as a community advisory group, I suppose. The event approval process has been streamlined, including the creation of a formal event application process, so that event applications are received twice a year. This allows administration and the event committee to look holistically at all of the events that require town involvement and to approve events so they are spaced appropriately through the year. We've also developed an event evaluation tool. I showed you this slide last time I was here, but I'll just go over it really quickly. So the evaluation criteria for events, it's all measured kind of on a scale of 1 to 4. Like you'll see it in your package under the evaluation tool. The types of things that we measure are community impact, community event performance, resource requirements, physical infrastructure requirements, strategic alignment, market demand, inclusion of local partners, and health, safety, and environment. Applications for event permits, including road closures, road and public place closures, have been evaluated. Okay, I already read that to you. Just didn't turn the page. Administration is now bringing forward the community event policy for an update to address other items from 2014 event review implementation plan, specifically to address the cost recovery process to recover direct costs for event support services and operational impacts associated with events. A cost recovery pyramid model would be used to establish appropriate and fair pricing for the rental of spaces and the provision of services. Lower fees will be charged to those community events that provide the most community benefit. The diagram shown on the screen right now shows you how we'll be, includes filming, which will be at the top, and will work its way down to the things that are of the greatest benefit. Over the past year, administration has been tracking event costs and has provided almost all user groups with an invoice of our in-kind contribution to the event. All town departments who provides event support, except for arts and event staff, have been tracking the hours and resources used to support each event. This practice will continue going forward so that the town can appropriately track what our event support actually is and to allow not-for-profit organizations to claim our in-kind support. Based on council feedback, when I was here in June at the Committee of the Whole meeting, the grandfathered section of this pyramid's been removed. So there's no event sitting at the bottom of that pyramid at 0. Administration would like to recommend a 3-year fee implementation plan for the Canmore Folk Music Festival, the Canmore Highland Games, the Rocky Mountain Half Marathon, and the Rundle Mountain Cycling Club races. The proposed implementation schedule is as follows and on the slide here. So in the highlighted area under 2017, you'll see what these groups would have been billed if they would have been billed at 100%. So those are in-kind contributions to those 4 entities. We're proposing all 4 of these groups would be on the 50% schedule on the pyramid, if they go back. They would all be sitting at 50% because all of them are not-for-profit, but they all charge fee for entry. So they sit at 50%. We're suggesting that in 2019, rather than go right to 50%, that we go to 25%, in 2020 to 35%, and in 2021 to 50%, which would be as high as it would ever go. The organizations listed here are not-for-profit entities. They have not paid fees for service in the past, and they might find it a hardship to move from 0 to 50 in 1 year without the opportunity to budget accordingly. The Canmore Highland Games is just getting back on its feet after a structure change. The Rundle Mountain Cycling Club is it's volunteer run and uses the funds raised at their events to support kids programming. The Canmore Folk Music Festival has partnered on several upgrades to Centennial Park and also supports many community groups. The Canmore Rocky Mountain Half Marathon is run by a philanthropic organization. All organizations have worked cooperatively with the town are in good standing. Implementing a 3-year fee structure plan to the organizers above demonstrates a fair, equitable, transparent, and consistent process for events at this level on the cost recovery pyramid. So I've tried to break it down on this slide, showing you what it would be for them as time goes through. So at 25%, you can see what each group would be paying in the first year, and at 35%, and then at 50%. So still they're getting a good benefit from the town. We're still giving them quite a good cost, a good in-kind contribution. However, we're not shocking them right away with the whole 50%.
Councillor McCallum, did you have a question?
Yeah, it was actually about this slide. Thank you. It's great, Matt. No, it's fine. I just want to make sure I understand it. So, and it says 100%, but I want to make sure that I understand it. So 11,000, for instance, the folk festival, 11,233.50 represents our full cost of.
Correct.
But that, so the 50%, the 5,616 would be their actual cost when this policy should
It's fully implemented.
Fully implemented.
Correct.
Okay. I wasn't sure if the 11,000 was the 50% of a $22,000 number. And that's what I was trying to make sure I understood. Thank you very much.
Yeah. If this policy is approved, the following financial impacts will occur. There will be a request in the 2019 budget for positive event signage, and there will also be the cost recovery fee structure proposed in the community event policy will have a positive financial impact, as most town services provided to community events are provided at no cost. All these groups, except for probably 4 in total, not these groups in particular, but 4 of our 60 or so event groups over the course of the year, have received invoices and letters for us letting them know this would be coming. We haven't got to 4, but we will. And they've also got in-kind in-kind invoices from us. So that's been part of our stakeholder engagement. We have worked with the event committee as well, so they have been involved at all levels.
Did you say there was 60 event groups?
Yeah, we have about 60 events over the course of the year.
Oh.
Some of these groups do more than 1 event, so, you know, I mean, it's, yeah, but we permit 60. And that's all I have for you today.
Thank you very much. Councillor Sanford.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you for your presentation, Ms. Bartolome. I had a question for you specifically about the invoice that we're basing this number on for the Canmore Highland Games. And one of the costs on that invoice are the building permits for tents at $3,120. Right. So what does that entail for them to get a building permit? Is it an application? Is it a review?
Yes, there is, in order to have a, let's see here. All building permits, or there's building permit applications that go through the planning department. And so anything that's over 600 square feet has to have a building permit if it's going to have people in it. And for some of the tents, occupancy permits are also required. So their Kaylee tent is a huge structure, and so building permits are required for that. So yes, it is an application process, and Al Bessie, our building inspector, goes out and inspects the tents.
So there's quite a bit involved in that.
There is.
And there's safety regulations with fire, et cetera,
There are.
too, right? Okay.
Yeah.
So it's not just paper, it's a complete oversight of that, just the size of that facility because it's so big?
It's not just that facility. There's several tents on the grounds of Highland Games that have people housed in them that require building permits. It's not just that one tent.
Okay.
Folk Festival will have building permits done, you know, so there's several events. Anything over 20 by 30 is kind of where we go.
And it refers to the master fee schedule, so is that the rate currently on the master fee schedule? Is
That's the rate that planning charges, so that's the actual fee that planning would charge for those, yes.
So these would be the fees on a go-forward basis, because we are already referring to the master fee schedule for this.
Correct.
For this in-kind rate.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Comfort, did you have a comment?
I was just going to add to that, just as a reminder, of course, council approves the master fee schedule with part of the budget, so the current fees could change in future years, but that comes to council for approval.
Councillor Comfort?
Thank you. That was actually one of my questions. So those increases going forward, this is now, but as we all know, 2021 is some time from now, and it's likely that will be a bigger increase than what's shown there. So did you have a chance to engage with the Highland Games and the Canmore Folk Festival and the RMCC and the other group about those actual amounts of what they're looking at?
No, I didn't.
Okay. So I know that some of those groups are facing extraordinary expenses this year in terms of what they're looking at for services that were provided in the past, and they're going up considerably. What I'd like to discuss with council to propose is slowing that schedule up a little bit to give them a little extra time to do things like market to their customers that they're going to increase fees because their costs are going up or the like. But so I'm just initiating that now. So that was my question about they don't know these actual amounts.
No, they don't know those numbers.
Okay.
No.
Thanks.
So just on that point, Councillor, you said that you know several of the groups' costs are increasing significantly this year.
Well, I know.
Can you give specific details?
I do. The Folk Fest is looking at a $10,000 increase in the sound costs for this year. New safety regulations have another $2,000 increase. I don't actually know, I haven't had a chance to follow up about ticket increases, whether there were some this year. And the other question I had was there the Folk Fest in particular, I don't know about the other events, but perhaps they also have done things to improve the town facilities. So specifically at Folk Fest, it was the Folk Fest that built the stage, the Stan Rogers stage initially. They contributed to the water line, the electricity upgrades, a number of other things. Was there any thought of giving them credit for those facility improvements?
No, there wasn't.
Okay. So anyway, what do you think, Council?
I think it's too early to have the debate.
Okay, that's what I want to talk about, so there you go.
Councillor Seeley.
Thank you, Your Worship. Along those same lines, when I look at the Highland Games, they're just starting up again, so they're going to have some financial pressures. And to Councillor Comfort's point, the Canmore Folk Music Festival has contributed a lot to the community. They prop up other groups, they help where they can. I'm wondering if we could have some consideration. When I look at those numbers, there's a lot of expense to go in. I do appreciate that. When you presented at the COW, you suggested that it'd be zero cost, and I think they should contribute something. But the Canmore Folk Festival also, they're going to have a significant increase to the hotel stays this year. So there's some realities that come in. So if we can tier it over a longer period of time, or maybe look at those percentages for those two, and I guess that'd be a motion. Hey, if,
is there a question for Ms. Bartolome, or is this part of the debate?
Oh, I guess Councillor Comfort asked if you approach those groups. I'm just trying to figure out where to go with this. If it could be a takeaway, or does this have to be decided today?
Council can do whatever we want when
Okay.
it comes to us.
I'm just thinking we might have more discussion with those two groups, so I'll give that some thought.
Okay. Somebody over there have something to add? Dr. Cottle?
Yeah, I'll just, from my perspective, what's helpful for administration is to have direction from council in terms of the changes to the policy. Specific arrangements with different groups is something we can work out, but understanding that this is the policy direction that council wants us to go is a helpful framework. So if you want to make changes to this timeline or ask administration to work on the timeline, that's all fine, right? That's just transactional details. But the direction on the policy is really the helpful thing, so that we understand what it is that we're trying to work towards. And then the timeline to get groups there is a different, more operational conversation.
Yeah, we're going to be, there's two motions. Yeah. One is to simply approve the policy, straightforward. And then the second motion is the question of implementing over time for those identified groups. So council can certainly change the direction
amend
there,
that second motion, or
beg your pardon?
Council could make amendments or suggest changes to that
Postpone
second motion.
That motion. There ain't no end of things council can do there. But to Dr. Cottle's point, the policy could stand alone, could stand, it doesn't require to have that motion approved or as worded.
I do have a question about the percentages.
Go ahead.
So 25, 35, and 50%, is there a reason? These are all older, well-established groups, I think anywhere from 10 years to 41 years. Is there a reason that we went 25, 35, and 50? Is that for consistency with all groups?
All other groups, when the policy is approved, when the policy is approved, all groups for the next event cycle will be adhering to this policy. I'm just suggesting that these four groups, that will be going from 0 to 50, implement more slowly. Those are the only four that are in that category that are not-for-profit, fee-for-entry groups. So rather than shock them right off from 0 to that level, I don't want to do that. So 3-year implementation plan, it's a bit arbitrary but seemed fair. A number had to be decided on, so that was the one that was chosen for discussion or for approval. Other groups that are at 25%, which are the community groups, no fee for entry, they're all going to be billed at 25% starting next year. So that was the starting point for these as well.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions from members of council? Councillor Comfort.
So if admin is looking for clear direction, I like the proposal. I like the policy direction. I think it's important that people realize there's a real cost to these events, and they certainly feel it in terms of the increased crowds and the popularity of the events and the strain on our services, streets, parking, etc. So I'm good with that, but I think that for these particular events, I'd like to see that schedule slowed up to give them each time to adapt to it.
Are there any questions from members of council for Ms. Bartolome? Seeing none?
I have a motion.
Do you have a question?
No, I have a motion.
Okay, a little early. Thanks very much for your presentation.
You're gonna force me to do it.
Then at this time, I will move the council approve the revised community event policy as of July 3rd, 2018, as presented. And I'll speak to the motion, unless somebody else wants to. This has been a long journey that we've been on around planning policy and procedures for events in the town of Canmore, going back, I don't know, 10 years? Yeah. And we keep getting better at it. Doesn't mean that it's any easier. I mean, Canmore is a choice place to want to host an event, and it's always going to cause stress in the community. But I think the town has been doing a really good job with trying to move forward with appropriate and meaningful policies and procedures. As Councillor Comfort noted a moment ago, there is a cost, there has been a cost to the town through all of the work, through all of the years, and now in the policy we're recognizing that and setting up a schedule, just as we do for our rec facilities and other facilities. So I'll be happy to support the policy as presented. Councillor McCallum.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yeah, we've been working on this, I know, since I've been elected. Events provide a lot of vibrancy in our community. A pretty exciting place to be for a town of 13,000 people. I would venture to guess you would have a hard time finding as an exciting a community of the same size anywhere else in Alberta. Couldn't, no chance. Canada Day alone. But there is a weight on our community in general with those events, and I think that Ms. Bartolome has done a really great job of working with this stakeholder group, or sorry, this advisory group, and working with the event producers to try and find some balance in all of that. So I appreciate this policy that's come forward, and I totally appreciate the work that was done on the pyramid and how we aren't arbitrarily charging people different things for different, for the same things actually, that there's more consistency in it. So yeah, I'll be happy to support this policy and look forward to see how it gets implemented moving forward with different event producers.
Councillor Seeley.
I'd like to make an amendment, if I could.
To the policy?
To the policy, yep.
Proposing an amendment to the policy. Okay.
Ms. Hyde, did you get my amendment? Oh, it's for the next one?
Yeah, the policy is on the table right now.
Sorry. I will support the policy. I like special events, and it's about time that we did something like this. Other municipalities do it, and it's important, and yeah, I will support it.
Great. Councillor Sanford.
Thank you, Your Worship. I too will support the policy. I think a lot of thought has gone into this, and I think I said that at the cow when it was first presented, but the policy encompasses a lot of the issues that get raised by the community, because when we do have special events in the community, there are impacts. So I think it's important to respect the fact that the impacts need to be for a good purpose. And I think the pyramid defines the need and the direction that we like to move towards when we're having a special event. And the checklist that was provided was also helpful, because we can look at, why we're doing some of these things and consider that if the impact is worth it. That's a good way to look at some of the special event programming. And I think it's very fair. I think the policy talks about the fairness component of this as well. So I'd be happy to support it. And I know a lot of work has gone into this, so thank you.
Councillor Hillstead.
Thank you, Your Worship. I will also be supporting this. Lots of good work went into it. It looks really good, and hopefully it'll implement really well, and everyone will be happy. Everyone.
Good one.
Nice. I know.
Councillor, who did I call? Comfort.
Yes, I also would support this and very much appreciate the hard work put in by Arts and Events on this policy. I particularly like the acknowledgement, the sort of unspoken acknowledgement that this isn't just about bringing tourists and visitors in to spend their money in our town, that it's really that events add something kind of intangible quality to the quality of life here. And I think it's terrific, so thank you.
There's no further discussion on the motion. We can move forward with making everybody happy. I'll call the question on the motion. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. We'll then move the council approve the 3-year fee implementation plan for the Canmore Folk Music Festival, Canmore Highland Games, Rundle Mountain Cycling Club, and the Canmore Rocky Mountain Half Marathon. Discussion on the motion. Councillor Comfort.
Looks so tired.
Okay, so I would like to propose an amendment to that schedule for the 4 events that we were discussing earlier, and that would be a 10% per year increase over 5 years, getting it up to the 50%.
On the overhead.
Oh, yeah, I guess so.
Getting to the same point, but just taking longer.
And also, it's not written up properly, but also, I think I would like some kind of acknowledgement that addresses, it'll be difficult to address past contributions, just because I know how much the folk
Is this part of your amending motion?
Yes, but I haven't been able to write it up, so I'd like something that addresses a credit for the contribution of dollars or in-kind services to improving facilities. That would be
What, a plaque?
balanced off. So it's the kind of thing like with the Folk Fest paid for part of the water line to go in to Centennial. They also paid for the Stan Rogers stage. So it's a similar sort of thing to what we did for Notre Dame des Monts for the playground, that project got advanced and the funds got matched because they raised money for it. It's the same kind of idea. So I'd like something.
There wasn't any matching funds there.
Or sorry, not matching funds, but they advanced that project in the schedule.
So let's make this 2 amendments.
Okay, yep.
So the first one being to move forward with the increase over a 5-year period, or implement over a 5-year period, increasing at 10% a year, rather than the proposed implementation schedule. That's essentially your amending motion. Speaking to the motion, Councillor Seeley.
Not speaking to the motion, I might have an amendment that'll help get us there.
Well, there's an amending motion on the table.
Yeah, so I'm just...
So we'll speak to that motion. Anybody care to speak to Councillor Comfort's amending motion? Councillor Stanford.
I'm kind of confused as to what the steps would be. So 10% of what we see as the invoice amount, year over year. So in the first year it'd be like $1,100, the second year it'd be $2,200, sort of that, like that? Is that what we're talking about?
No.
I can just display this quickly.
So it would be 10% on the previous year. So the first year it's $11,000, so 10%.
So it's in relation to their bill. So what Ms. Bartolome is proposing is on the left, 25, 35, and 50% of the total bill over 3 years.
Okay.
What I understand Councillor Comfort to be proposing is for that amount to increase by 10% per year. So the first year they pay 10% of the bill, the second year 20, over 5 years until they reach 50, which is in line with the policy. So it's just changing from the 3 percentages over 3 years to the 5 different percentages over 5 years.
And so instead of 25% the first year, what
It would be 10%.
could we just look at that previous schedule that we were shown? Because I don't see that. That's not actually in our package.
There it is.
So
currently the Canmore Folk Festival gets in-kind services of $11,000. Under the pyramid structure, they would be billed at 50%, which would give them 4,700, no, pardon me, 5616.
Right, after the 4 years, or after 3 years, after 3 years, okay.
Councillor Comfort is suggesting that rather than over 3 years, that it expand over 5 to get them to that number of 5616.
So the first year, at 10%, it would be significantly lower than 2,800. It would be like $1,100.
$1,100.
Yeah.
First year.
Okay, so each year it would incrementally increase up to the 50% mark.
Correct.
Okay, but the first year it would only be $1,100 as opposed to 2,800. Okay, that's an
Comfort.
interesting.
And the other point being that the invoice, as prepared by A&E, would be, would increase as well. So the amounts that are shown there for 2020 and 2021 would not necessarily be those actual amounts. It's my understanding. We don't know what those amounts are.
No, those are just to show you.
Right. So that means whatever the unknown amount would be a little bit less and could be spread out over 5 years, which would mitigate the impact. That was my thinking.
Right. Councillor McCallum?
I'll just wait for the chaos to die down and make sure we've got everything we're looking at before I comment.
I think we got it.
Okay, so I had in my mind maybe spreading it out over 4 years. I think 5 years is too much, so I won't be able to support your amendment. Because I think that you're focusing specifically, Councillor Comfort, specifically on FolkFest.
Point of order.
Pardon me?
Point of order.
Okay, thank you. But I think that 4 years is enough time for these nonprofits to be able to absorb these costs. And that in past, these events have been played against other organizations in the community, not played, but the pricing hasn't been even across the board. So now we're starting with even pricing, and we're recognizing already that these are the 4 top permits that are pulled, that this policy will have the most impact. And so I think that 3 years, in my opinion, is an appropriate amount of time. And then I think that the whole idea of adding for credit in the second part of the motion, which I don't fully understand yet.
That'll be a separate motion.
Okay. Seems to just gum up the works even more, because everybody's going to be looking for credit for everything that they do.
That one's not
But
on
in
the
relation to this, I would be able to support a maximum of 4 years.
Councillor Seeley?
I'll support the amendment. I was going to consider something similar myself. I think it is an easier start for these groups to adjust to in a longer period of time, so it makes sense for all of these.
I'll support the amending motion as well. I think the important thing is we recognized, or we are recognizing, there's a cost to the town of Canmore to help mount these events, and we've established cost recovery pyramid, which in the long run will be really helpful and important. Through this proposed implementation plan, I think we're recognizing the effect of the implementation or of the cost recovery pyramid to the various groups that have been organizing events here for a number of years. Whether that's spread over a 3-year, 4-year, 5-year period doesn't make that much of a difference to me personally. So I think given Councillor Comfort's suggestion that there's additional unexpected expenses coming forward this year for the Folk Festival, I'm quite prepared to see the implementation spread over 5 years. That's what you said, 5 years. Councillor O'Meara?
I will support the motion that's on the table. I have no problem with these long-term groups spreading it out over the longer term, keeping in mind that the fees are probably going to increase anyways because of the cost of things that we're doing for them will have an increase. So I will support this motion.
Councillor Hillstad?
I will also support the motion over 5 years. It again, for many of the things that have already been said, just with the long-standing nature and just they're going from 0 to 50 would be a little bit hectic. So I think 5 years isn't terrible. So I think 5 years will work.
Okay, so on the amending motion, I'll call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried with Councillor McCallum in opposition. Then back to the main motion as it's amended then, that council approve a 5-year fee implementation plan for Canmore Folk Music Festival, Canmore Highland Games, RMCC, and the Canmore Rocky Mountain Half Marathon. Discussion on the amended motion. See none, call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. Did you have another motion? I do. Well, let's see it.
So, I don't know if this is amending, another motion. I would like to direct administration.
That would take the motion.
Okay. Okay, I would like to direct administration to discuss the possibilities with these 4 groups in particular, but perhaps with others that they know are capable of accomplishing such things. So when we look at the improvements that were done at Centennial by, my knowledge extends to Folk Fest, but I'm sure that there are other groups that have also done things for other facilities like bike trails or regular trails, where the races run, all of that sort of thing, that be discussed and that a policy be worked out so that they could get their fees reduced if the fees are a problem for them. I don't know exactly what that looks like, so I'd like to see you bring something forward.
I gotta say, I have no idea what they would bring forward.
Well,
Is there urgency on this? I mean, it could be that...
No, it's like, I guess I could talk to administration about it and see what it looks like, but it's just that when we take all of that community will, and things are facilitated, it's more than the sum of its parts. So I'm sort of thinking back, I'm casting my mind back here, when in past times, a long time ago, more than 20 years, at the town of Canmore, there was a reluctance to entertain suggestions from the public or from community groups. And obstacles were put in the way, usually passively, not aggressively, but that made it difficult for volunteers to advance improvements in programs and facilities. And I just am looking for a way to continue the spirit of facilitation and improvement that I've seen for the last 10 years. Does that make sense?
We'll see if Ms. Bartolome can make sense of it.
Okay.
And if not, we'll leave this for another day.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, I will go and see.
I suggest, you
I'll go
talk
see
with
Ms.
admin, and
yeah.
this could come back after the summer break, and...
Okay.
Yeah. No.
That was easy. I tried. It's not an amendment?
Councillor Seeley, you have the floor.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry, a new motion. Yeah.
Councillor Seeley?
Ms. Hyde, do you have it? Yeah. Along the same lines, but maybe a little cleaner, the Canmore Folk Music Festival will be approached to negotiate a separate agreement to this policy. So with their community input and everything, you know, they built the stage, they built the washrooms, they continue to assist in a meaningful way and assist other community groups. That if administration were to work with the Canmore Folk Music Festival, they might be able to come up with something that makes sense.
Speaking to the motion, I wouldn't support it. Much as I love the Folk Music Festival and have for 41 years now, having been a hippie potter, the first one, selling my work. But the Folk Music Festival, as we've already acknowledged, there's a whole lot of great events going on in Canmore, and most all of them require a lot of volunteers, and many of them become part of our lifeblood. So if we're going to treat the folk music festival separately or differently for some reason, it's just going down a road that I don't want to go down. I would treat them all equally the same, so I won't support your motion. Councillor Mara?
I too will not be able to support the motion. I agree that's a great community event. I think when the Folk Festival did this, they weren't looking to get anything back out of it. They were just looking to improve their event and support everybody in the town. And I think there's many groups that have done it, and private, or not-for-profit along the way. Maybe there's a way of doing some sort of recognition to them, but I cannot support this motion.
Councillor Comfort.
So unexpectedly and oddly perhaps, I can't support it either because the main thrust of having this policy was to create something that was equitable and fair, and having a separate agreement that is negotiated in private initially, I think is contrary to that notion. So while I would want credit to be received where credit is due, I think we can work that out without changing the policy. So I can't support this amendment.
Councillor Sanford.
Thank you, Your Worship. I can't support this amendment because we just went through a process of trying to create a policy that's fair and equitable to all the groups, and this takes it to another place that now creates more work for administration. So no, I won't support this.
Is there further discussion on the motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's defeated, with Councillor Seeley supporting this motion. I think that's everything on this G3, isn't it? Anybody else have any surprise motions or anything? Seeing none, thanks for your work, Ms. Barlomi. We'll move on to item G4, the Quarry Lake Park design phase for capital project. Mr. Canmore.
Good evening, Mayor Borman and members of council. So yes, here to talk about Quarry Lake Park and the request to make a mid-year addition to our capital project list for $100,000 to do some design work to look at the next steps of doing enhancements in that location. So there's the recommendation there. You can see the funding source. We would call it other, but it's going to be specifically funded from the Rocky Mountain Heritage Foundation. Partly because they are a co-owner of the park, in addition to the town of Canmore. It has a board members, and they jointly own and manage the facility. We are here tonight because there's been a number of steps that has taken place over the last couple of years that has brought us to this day today. So it goes back to 2014 when we went out to the community and asked them, what would you like to have done in the park? The results, I'll go through in more detail, and then what subsequently came out of that was, based on those results, was the Rocky Mountain Heritage Foundation had hired a consulting firm to go out and do a conceptual plan, and as well as do some cost estimates, some preliminary cost estimates to do some of those works as supported by the community. And then going into the fall of 2016, in preparation of the 2017-2018 budgets, the 5-year budget plan, administration had taken from that initial report in 2016 and had put a number of projects together, spaced them out over a number of years, done some revisions on the costing, and proposed a capital plan. And one of them was to do a design work in 2018. The unfortunate thing is, up to that point, we didn't have any funding for any of the projects. So it sat there unfunded in a holding place until we were able to secure funding, which is why we're here tonight. So just to go back, little bit of reference. In 2014, when we did the community survey, there was close to 60% of the community supported doing some type of enhancement in the park. A lot of people did speak to, they love the park. It's a very popular park in the summer when it's warm to run events, weddings, etc. And they love just the natural beauty of it. And so there wasn't a lot of appetite to do a lot. You know, there was a fraction of people who wanted concessions and maybe even a playground, but the bulk of people preferred to leave it fairly natural, but would like to see some improvements made. So we have here a list of some of the things that people were proposing, making the parking lot bigger. Since the survey, we've actually made the parking lot bigger because of the pressures on the highway that feed into the parking lot to get some of those vehicles off of there, as well as more picnic tables around the park, around the lake itself, more washrooms, and more trees for shade in the summertime.
You're missing one of the more important suggestions from that 2014 community survey.
The nudist beach?
The nudist beach.
The nudist beach, yeah. Yes, that was, you know, it was an open-ended survey that we didn't say, we're thinking of doing these things, what percentage of the population would like this? We left it open saying, what would you like to see? And Mayor Borman is correct, nudist beach did make the list. But not a ton of support, which is why it's not here.
Oh, that's...
So here's the IBI report. It was an attachment to the staff report. Hopefully you've had an opportunity to go through that. And you can see here that the consultant had identified a number of almost every location within the park and on the peripheral of the park, adjacent lands as well, making suggestions on some type of enhancements. Here's a snapshot of the areas that was of most interest to administration and an area that we would like to go to the community for to gauge their feedback, and so it's looking to do enhancements of the parking lot, formalize it a bit more than what it is, add a washroom to that location, some more trees, for example. And then as we go to the park, the lake itself, which is this area here, to do enhancements at the north and the south end of the beach. So possibly more sand, picnic tables, trees, etc., and likely a washroom, down at this end. And you can see here where it's proposed to add another beach to this location here. So with that, we developed a 5-year capital plan that looked at doing a lot of that stuff that I just walked through. Another one we haven't really talked about is the trail network through the park, to do upgrades to those, formalize those a little bit more. There's a lot of impromptu animal trails. So to formalize that, direct people into those trails, as well as provide signage that, you know, about wildlife education, interacting with wildlife, coexistence with wildlife, as well as you are either entering or leaving the park boundary. And as I mentioned, it's been unfunded, so we haven't moved ahead with any of the projects. We've had a recent meeting with the board, and they have agreed to fund the $100,000 for the 2018 design phase. And you can see that that's up there at the top of 2018. This is what administration put together. So there's the parking lot, the North Beach, the top of the hill, at about $200,000. About 100 of that is related to a piece of public art which wouldn't be funded from the foundation. There's other sources. I think it's called the Public Art Trust or Reserve, where that would come from, and some of the other enhancements for a total of over 4 or 5 years, about $1.5 million that would need to be raised for the capital infrastructure. At this point, those remain unfunded, and what we'd like to do is, once we can get approval for the design phase, is we can get some feedback from the community in August, and then really nail down those designs, do detailed designs so we can firm up the costing, and then have discussions with the board about what those costs are, and they are going to be moving forward with a funding campaign or fundraising campaign to fund those capital projects. Our relationship with the foundation has historically been where they do the fundraising for the projects, they provide the funding, and the town of Canmore delivers the projects, and once they're in place, we maintain it. So the intent is for that to continue. We have the website, the Town of Canmore website has a page dedicated to Quarry Lake. Went up last week when the council agenda went out. So if anyone in the public would like some more information, especially regarding the details of the survey, including the reference to the nudist beach, not sure if that's there.
Yeah, it's
They
online.
can, they can go to that page and look at the more details. And as the program progresses, the page will be updated. And that is my presentation. There's the recommendation.
Thanks very much. To the public art possibility, that Quarry Lake hasn't been identified as a public art site through our public art policy yet, so that's just suggested out there in the...
Absolutely. It's not in stone whatsoever. It's just throwing the possibility for discussion out there of an opportunity.
Great. Are there any questions in for Mr. Canmore at this time? Councillor Sanford?
Thank you, Your Worship. How does the concept plan relate to a design plan? Because there are design elements in this concept plan that I would imagine would be encompassed. I mean, is the concept plan, it already has some pricing attached to it, but the design plan is another step?
Yes, it's really just a starting point. It's very conceptual, so it would help to make people understand the drawings or the enhancements that's being proposed. So they put in itemized items such as new picnic tables and all of that, and they had a price for it. We don't know if that's exactly where we want them to go, so that's where we need to get the detailed design. You know, we've got a trail that goes around the picnic tables on this north beach. Maybe we want picnic tables on the other side of it, and then we add some more trees. So those are the things we haven't really worked through. And also those pricings were 2016. We're gonna, you know, as we go out, the consulting firm, I don't know if they use pricing from Canmore. From our first glance, it's unlikely. They use more like Calgary pricing, and we expect those to be a little slightly higher. So we want to go through that design phase so we can see exactly where things are going to be. This was just like a first brush. Then we can, once we're happy with where the locations are, then we can do the detailed design, like the profile work, you know, what kind of anchoring systems do we need for picnic tables, for example.
And so the $100,000 that they're giving to this project, that's not matching funding, that's going to fund the full design?
Correct.
And then when we get the prices attached to each design element, then where does the town go with that kind of information? Do we look at continuing a funding relationship with Rocky Mountain?
Yes, I think it's difficult for the foundation to go and do fundraising now because we don't exactly know what the total, what the final design is going to look like, and then the subsequent cost to go with it. So the idea is to define those two through the design phase, so that after we're done the design phase, we're going to have detailed drawings to go out to tender for, really understand what the costs are going to be, and so that they understand what the target is for them to go out and do the fundraising.
And it says that they will do the bulk of the fundraising, or are we going to be expected to match that as well at some point?
My understanding is it'll be similar to what we've done in the past, is they will do the full fundraising for the capital, but the town of Canmore, our administration will deliver the projects, and once the assets are in, we'll be maintaining them, which is what we've done to date. The expectation is to do that going forward.
Mr. Farr?
So just to supplement what Mr. Como was saying, the exact nature of how the funding for the rest of the project will be developed remains unclear. The board has committed that they will do some fundraising. There are also potentially some opportunities with the Olympics or with an Olympic bid should that move forward. And there may, depending on how things work, there may come back as an ask to the town, which is something that the town would then have to consider whether, or council would have to consider whether or not to approve. But we can't know any of those things until we advance to the next stage of the process.
Okay, so that's going to give us better numbers for
Yes.
that part of the process.
Yes.
And we're still, is there a town component to the design phase, or is that contracted out? Because we are not delivering anything on the design phase.
No, we'll be hiring a firm to do the design work for us, but the town will be doing the, working with the designer and leading the engagement process as well. Our hope is to do some stuff online, but we have an opportunity to go out right to the site and engage the people that are actually using the facility and hear what they have to say at the same time.
Okay, thank you. That makes it more clear for me.
Councillor Comfort.
Thank you for your presentation. I'm just wondering if, so at the entry into the parking lot currently, that road, is that 742 or is that a provincial road or is that a town of Canmore road?
That's provincial highway.
Okay. So are there complications because of that? So if we wanted to improve that entryway, make the turning wider, the crosswalk that's there is sort of off-center to where the trail comes up like that, would we have to get provincial permission?
Yes, I don't think we're going to go into the roadway too much. The idea is to improve the parking lot area. If some of the work does go into the road right away, yes, we'll be having conversations with Alberta Transportation, make sure they're fine with any of the work we're looking to do. One of the things that may end up in that area right now is, interesting enough, as you approach it, thankfully we've installed our wayfinding that says Quarry Lake is up ahead, but we don't actually introduce and welcome you to the park, and that could very well be in the road right away.
Okay, thank you.
Are there questions for Mr. Comeau? Councillor Comfort?
Sorry, I had another question. So I looked at the plan that was provided, and one of the things that was mentioned were benches throughout in various locations at a cost of about $1,500 a pop. And I wondered, could we reintroduce our memorial bench program to accommodate those costs, perhaps?
I think that would be a fantastic idea.
Okay. Great, I had a fantastic idea as well as going all over the place, so thank you so much.
Councillor Seeley.
Mr. Coma, the survey results, it says close to 60% of the respondents were in favor of improvements. Why wouldn't people be in favor of this? 40% spoke against it. Just keep it in its natural state. Is that kind of the...
They weren't speaking against this concept plan. That's 2 years ago, and just the idea of any changes at Quarry wasn't unanimously supported in that survey.
Anything specific other than that stood out?
No, Mayor Borman's correct. I think people just, this was before any ideas were out there. This was just generally, do you want to see improvements or not? And so the 40% did not want to see it change the way it's currently designed.
A little surprising. Thanks.
Well, I think there was just sort of an uninformed concern that would be grandiose and big.
Right.
So, yeah, I think it was just a cautionary note from some. Are there other questions for Mr. Comeau? Seeing none, thanks for your presentation. And then I will move the council approve a new 2018 capital project entitled Quarry Lake Design for $100,000 to be funded from other, which is the Rocky Mountain Heritage Foundation. I'll support the motion. I sit on the foundation board, and this has been a night of business moving forward for several years, starting actually with the survey in 2014, so that's 4 years. And it was the foundation board that engaged IBI landscape architects to do the original concept plan, and it's moved very slowly through that through the foundation board. The board aren't meeting every week or anything. They meet periodically. We all know how popular, how much people love Quarry Lake, and we also know how it's fairly congested and maxed out, and certainly things like additional toilets and better parking, things like that, I think will be a big improvement. It's great that the foundation board is leading the work and prepared to do the brunt of the fundraising, so I'm happy to support the motion. Others speaking to the motion? None, I'll call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. Moving on to G5, Mr. Comeau.
Good evening again. I hope this one goes just as well. I'm back here again to seek funding change to a capital project in the utilities area. So this is Lift Station 2, and this is an already existing approved capital project, and administration is just asking that council consider allowing the project budget to increase from $2.9 million to $3.75 million, so we can continue with the project in 2018. The balance, or to allow it to go up to $3.75, $850,000, we're proposing that that be funded from the utility reserve, which can afford to take that hit, that mid-year hit. So, just to help reference council as well as the gallery, here is the location for Lift Station 2. It's actually right here. This is Elevation Place to the north, and the bridge into Spring Creek Mountain Village to the south, the bottom of the screen. So it's this location right here. You can see it's a pretty critical lift station when you see a lot of pink, I'm glad they're pink, not brown, pipes that lead to this facility. And so it's a fairly critical facility. When we did the 2016 UMP update, it identified that it required to be upgraded. And right now it's a lift station. We have two like this in town that are quite small. It's just basically a barrel in the ground with pumps. And you can see from the photograph, it's quite a critical station in a fairly critical location. Albo Valley Trail comes down and Railway Avenue comes down into that one lift station. So if that one fails, we're in trouble. And so the idea is to create a formal lift station like the other ones we see around town. It's really those buildings with no windows that are more formalized and better protected. So in the 2018 budget, we had, actually, and I want to just back up, this is not the first time we've asked for an increase to this budget, so I'm just going to walk through that. So the original budget was $1.7 million, and that was the number that was identified in the UMP that was done in 2016. Unfortunately, the consultant, which was a new consultant to the town, had used some of the groundwater conditions from outside of the valley, Chestermere, where they do a lot of work, very different ground conditions than what we have here. So that's why when we identified that to the consultant, they had to go back and do a design report, which is what they did in the fall of 2018. So then when we came back to council to do some adjustments to the 2-year budget, this was one of the ones that we had asked to increase from 1.7 to 2.9, where they took into more consideration the impact of doing a lift station in significantly high groundwater. So it's a very challenging project to do. You have to make sure the hole has all the water out of it before you can start putting in a wet well or a concrete barrel. So then they had considered all of that and increased it to 2.8, and council approved the increase. Now we go through the process. So we pre-qualified 4 contractors. We went through the tender process, and unfortunately, when we went out to real market, and it's tricky between what the consultant feels that the project should be worth based on their experience with similar type projects to the real world, we can get hit with some of these from time to time. So we didn't want to just go with it. We wanted to see if there were some opportunities to try to bring the budget down. So we had the consultant go out and do an analysis. Why did we have, why did we miss the mark yet again? And we'd also like you to go out and look at some design modifications so maybe we can start to bring the price down. The original design had it quite a ways from where the manhole is located, or the lift station is currently. It's quite a distance away where we're going to build a new one. You can't build it right on top because you need to have the one continuing to function while you build the other one. And so what we decided to do was to bring it much closer so that you have less trenching, less piping that you have to do. So that helped bring the price down, as well as the shape of the wet well. So instead of going from a box to going to a cylinder, you can reduce some of the costs as well. So then, using the same pre-qualified contractors, we went back out again. The prices came down, but it brought us into the $3.75 million range. So we did try to make some adjustments to bring it down even more, but that's as close as we could go without delaying the project. And so we went out to tender, and as I said, this is the price we have if we want to proceed with the project. There are alternatives for council to consider. As I said, we talked about the wet well. Right now, the project, the way it was scoped, is there's an opportunity here that was identified from our municipal engineer that if we went deeper with a deeper wet well and a bigger wet well, we have the opportunity to reduce the requirement for lift station 5, which is where Fairholme and 17th Street are. There's that lift station there, as well as to the lift station 3, which is at the entrance to Industrial Place. That's the other barrel type lift station that we have in town. They require maintenance, they require energy, and at some point they require replacement. So this was a really good opportunity. So we wanted to continue with that. So we could reduce the size of the barrel, the wet well, we could reduce the height that we go down, but we would lose that opportunity to take those lift stations offline at some point in the future. The other piece that would be required for us to do that is the piping from the new lift station 2 out to those catchment areas would also have to be deeper and larger to take the capacity off of those lift stations. So that's the other piece that we would have to do in order to make all of that puzzle work. So if we made it smaller, we would lose that opportunity, taking lift station 3 and 5 offline at some point in the future. The other thing that would happen, because we're taking all that capacity through that one lift station, our current model shows that there is a section on 7th Avenue and a section on 10th Street that would be over capacity if we didn't do anything. By taking that pressure from lift station 3 and 5 off, we wouldn't have to do those upgrades as well. So we felt it was beneficial to move ahead. The other option administration considered was to just delay the project. A lot of similar impact, and the biggest one is those pumps are a number of years old. There's a lot of corrosion happening on the wet well. Normally they're made out of concrete. This one's made out of steel. It's heavily corroded. We want to ensure that we don't put ourselves in a situation we violate with the province, where we have a release where sewer is allowed to leave the lift station. So it's not administration's, well, not a recommendation, but even suggestion that we delay the project. And then if we do delay it, we won't meet the schedule that engineering's looking to do in terms of replacing or resurfacing the resurface work scheduled in the near future for Railway Avenue, which is where we would do those bigger pipes that go a little bit deeper. That's our opportunity to do that. So if we delay the project, the roads will be resurfaced, and it wouldn't really make sense to do it for at least another 20, 25 years. So we've looked at those, and despite that, we still feel that that would be the best thing to do is to go forward with that project at the $3.75 million. Again, knowing that we're asking for another $850,000 coming out of the reserve, how can we do that? The finance team has let us know that our current balance for the year end is $5.8 million in the reserve, which is higher than what we had projected. We projected to be more like 4.4 million. So now our balance at the end of the year end is going to be roughly $5 million. And our target we try to hit is 6.5 million, and we'll easily hit that by 2020. We have an influx of money in there that we hadn't expected, is largely because of the volume of development that's going on. We've been collecting a lot more development fees. A portion of that goes into the utility reserve for offsites. So there's been a huge benefit that there's been a high level of development, and then we've got this increase cost that we need to request. And so for that reason, because the utility reserve is able to fund it, there is no suggestion that we need to make any adjustments to the utility rates.
You just said we would easily hit the reserve target by 2020. Easily.
Yes. Well, I guess we'll talk in the fall and see if that's still the case. But we're confident that we will hit. Yeah.
Nothing's easy.
Change my use of words. So with that, that's the end of my presentation, and I can answer any questions if there are.
Great, thanks very much. first observation is the consultant learned an important lesson through our project.
I believe he's learned a few.
The one of the things that were clear to me through your presentation and report is either of the alternatives would end up requiring future upsizing of the sanitary main along 7th and 10th, which I'm just going to guess is an expensive project.
Correct. Yeah, they have groundwater issues as well.
Yeah, so by moving forward with this project, even with an additional cost, we're saving, or we're avoiding the need to replace the mains, which might be a lot more money than we would be saving by not proceeding.
But I would add that it's not just the lift station that we need to change the design, which is the current design. It's also upsizing and making the pipes deeper along railway that takes sewage from the lift station 5 and lift station 3 catchment areas is the other piece that we need to be aware of. Yeah, both need to happen.
Councillor Sanford?
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you, Mr. Canmore, for your presentation. In your report, it says that the bid validity is only valid until July 4th, which is tomorrow.
Yes.
So this is a critical decision. If it's not made today, then it's a postponement.
The risk is if the decision's delayed beyond tonight, then the bid's not valid, no longer valid, and we'll have to go back out to tender, and it's likely that the price will come in higher.
And are you saying that the piping on Railway Avenue is part of the cost of this?
No, it's something that will happen
cost.
in the future when we resurface, rehabilitate Railway Avenue.
So either way, we have to replace some pipe. Whether it's 7th or 10th or Railway Avenue or...
Correct. The UMP has identified the sanitary main under railway needs to be upgraded. What we're suggesting is that we do that at the same time, but make it bigger and deeper, which would then not require us to do the ones on 7th and 10th.
Okay, so it's an either-or situation.
We could, the UMP is also suggesting we do the ones on railway. If we do it to the size that's there right now, so not deeper and not bigger, then we will have to do the ones on... They're recommending all three get done if the one on railway is not made larger.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Are there other questions from members of council? Seeing none, thanks for your presentation. Then I will move council approve an increase in funding for capital project 7043, lift station 2 construction upgrade from $2,900,000 to $3,750,000, with the $850,000 to be funded from the utility reserve. Speaking to the motion. Yeah, well, I'll support the motion, of course. I mean, we got to do this work. And it's always discouraging when proposed budget doesn't come to pass. But I assume that the engineers are aware of what they're doing, the design consultants, so yeah, I don't see any option for council other than moving forward with this project. It's clearly a critical project for the facility, and I'm reassured to know that we'll easily get to our reserve target by 2020 nonetheless. So thanks for all the work you've been doing. I know this has been a tough one, so I will support the motion as presented. Councillor McCallum?
Sure, just figured it was such a riveting topic, I might perhaps add to your support. This is a core function of the municipality. We need to move the poop around town. And if we can't do this right, then we're in trouble. So I'm glad that we do this right. I'm glad that these decisions are based on the utility model, that they're not decisions based on politics, but on need and science and requirement. And so I'm happy to support this.
Further discussion on the motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We'll move on to item G6. Look at that, we're a half an hour ahead of time. Integrated Transportation Plan, Ms. Ellick. You must have been watching your monitor to see that we're moving ahead here.
Yeah.
There you go.
Good evening, Council. I'm here to present a draft submission of the technical updates to the 2014 Integrated Transportation Plan. This high-level planning document will provide the basis for projects and initiatives that will address Council's priority of managing congestion and parking in the town centre and ensure that our community effectively manages growth and travel demand in a manner that's consistent with our stated values. The draft Integrated Transportation Plan has been submitted with the Council agenda. My presentation will touch on the recommended technical updates to this plan. I'll suggest that I present the recommended updates to the plan fully, and then we can have a question period following. Clarifying questions are, of course, welcome during the presentation, if that works.
Thank you.
In previous presentations to Council, we reviewed current and future congestion challenges that Canmore may face. We also outlined the link between the ways in which we manage transportation and impacts on the community. The link between these outcomes and community goals and values forms the basis for the recommendations that I'm presenting today. I encourage anyone listening in to view the previous presentation online, and to visit our website where we have several videos and other content that provides more detail on transportation planning in our community. Technical updates to the Integrated Transportation Plan have been developed to create a transportation network that provides capacity for future growth with outcomes that support the community's goals, objectives, and targets. Recommending these updates is one of the ways that administration is addressing Council's priority of managing traffic congestion and parking in the town centre. These updates have been guided by established planning documents, including the MDP and the 2014 ITP, and were further informed through a workshop held with key stakeholders and a community open house in April of this year. The 2014 ITP is a long-range strategic document that guides transportation decisions and influences land use. Laid the groundwork for principles in community planning and roadway design that would enable greater choice and opportunity for residents and visitors to move around and connect in our community. These principles have informed a number of important projects over the last several years, including new pedestrian bridges on Spring Creek and Cougar Creek, improved connectivity to Bow Valley Trail, Benchlands Roundabout and pathway improvements, and Canmore's first complete streets rehab on Spring Creek Drive. These projects represent long-term investments in managing travel demand. The return on these investments will grow each year as a greater proportion of the population is enabled to choose travel options that don't require an automobile. So the 2014 ITP was developed based on significant engagement and with reference to relevant planning and strategy documents, including the Municipal Development Plan. While the plan identified a vision for a more sustainable multimodal transportation system, updates are needed to define requirements along corridors like Bow Valley Trail and Railway Avenue, and to inform engagement and design for future improvements. Canmore's Main Street and other roads in the town centre currently experience high levels of congestion on peak summer days. Even during typical summer days, moderate levels of congestion can be experienced. As Canmore's population and visitation grows, unless we continue to change how our roadways function and how people travel, congestion levels can be expected to worsen significantly in the future. The 2014 ITP set a mode share target of 30% walking, cycling, and transit trips by 2020. Currently, however, the majority of daily trips in Canmore are taken by automobile. With expected growth in the number of people living in and visiting Canmore, if no changes are made to the current network, the expected modal split for 2030 is shown above. As you can see, there's an increase in driving trips and associated congestion on our roadways. With successful implementation of the recommendations in the ITP, a significant shift is anticipated from car travel to walking, cycling, and taking transit. The plan includes recommendations for the use of best practices in street design to enable a shift to 40% non-automobile travel at peak times for trips within the town centre. This would reflect a typical summer day on a long weekend. It's important to note that a full third of residents are still expected to continue to drive for all of their trips during the summer season. One goal of enabling this shift in modes is that if some people choose to walk, cycle, or take transit for some of their trips, it will free up capacity on the roads for others to still be able to drive. If we follow a pattern of continuing to plan primarily for cars, Canmore's road network will experience much worse congestion in the future than it does today. By shifting modes, we can create an environment where it's comfortable for people to get around using a variety of options and to take part in daily life in Canmore's streets and public spaces. A number of network changes will be required in order to promote the uptake of transit and active transportation options. How streets are classified and designed is fundamental to enabling choice. The ITP recommends a shift from considering how desired form and function of the street influence behavior, which is an approach that prioritizes livability and safety. The recommended updates emphasize creating streets that have recognizable functions. Streets have traffic carrying as well as living, working, and playing functions. Recognizing that streets comprise a significant amount of public space, it's important to consider all of these functions as part of the planning and design process. Some of these ideas will be new to Canmore as they are in many communities. As we build new infrastructure, administration will work on educational programs to create greater understanding of new applications as they become a more usual part of day-to-day interactions. Recommended changes within the ITP feature an updated street classification to simplify roadway designs and to allow for an easier understanding of roadway hierarchy. These will inform future design requirements to allow for a consistent look and feel of roadways. For arterial roadways, this will mean designing for 50 km/h speeds, separate and protected cycling infrastructure, parking where it exists, restricted to parking bays, and pedestrian refuges at crossings. For collector roadways, this will mean creating environments that support 30 km/h speeds with separate and protected cycling infrastructure, parking either on-street or restricted to parking bays, and reduced pedestrian crossing distances. For local roadways, the updated street classifications will mean creating environments that support 30 km/h speeds with shared travel lanes between cars and cyclists, parking either in parking bays or on street, and marked crosswalks for pedestrians. The updates recommend an increased focus on moving traffic and goods around the town centre and moving people into the town centre to allow for a greater activation of Main Street. This may include changes to the roadway network around town centre to accommodate traffic flow on collector and arterial roadways. It may also include changes such as the free flow of movements north-south along 8th Avenue and traffic calming along the west 2 blocks of Main Street. So how do we get there? The recommended updates include short and long-term projects and strategies to realize the overall vision. One of the first pieces will involve the rapid implementation of a core network of separate and protected cycling facilities on collector and arterial roadways. Having a completed network of cycling infrastructure has been shown to be more effective at increasing cycling trips than the piecemeal implementation of routes over extended periods of time. An important aspect of creating infrastructure that is inviting to those who may be on the fence or interested in riding more, but concerned about riding on less comfortable facilities, is the assurance that they can get from start to finish of their trip without gaps in the network where they may be forced to ride in mixed traffic or higher stress environments. To increase the proportion of trips made in Canmore by bike, this will be a key piece to enabling a wider range of the population to cycle. Achieving a 5% mode share for transit will require a number of supporting strategies which will be developed in concert with Rome Transit. Rome envisions improved connectivity and amenities at bus stops, better accessibility, and increased service as contributing to growth in the number of people using transit. Another element that's been found to grow ridership in many communities is the establishment of fare-free transit, which Council has already approved during the summer months of 2018. Fare-free transit supports goals of affordability, allows potential riders to try out transit for free, and when combined with supporting infrastructure and programs, can make transit an attractive option for longer trips, inclement weather, and meet a wide variety of mobility needs. We can expect a 20 to 60% increase in ridership based on studies of other resort communities and based on our own statistics from the fare-free period.
You said 20 to 60% increase?
Yes.
That's the experience in other municipalities when they move to free transit?
Fare-free transit, yes, and based on our own statistics. Yeah.
Okay.
The ITP envisions a transportation system that will provide mobility and access for all. Most trips, regardless of which modes they involve, will begin and end as pedestrian trips. Creating infrastructure that's inclusive allows people of all ages and abilities to participate in public life. The ITP recommends continuing to fund accessibility improvements each year and continuing to connect missing pieces of infrastructure. Complete Streets roadway rehabilitation will be focused on key corridors throughout town. Enabling a greater uptake of transit, walking, and cycling will involve many pieces in addition to hard infrastructure. Embracing Canmore's northern climate means accounting for travel needs through all seasons. Ensuring that travel options are accessible year-round will require regular winter maintenance and lighting standards that allow people to feel comfortable and safe during the shorter daylight hours of the winter months. As the design of Canmore streets change, speeds will begin to reflect the updated roadway classifications. For existing local roads, traffic calming provides an opportunity to address areas where high traffic speeds and through traffic affect the livability and safety of residential neighborhoods. Studies have shown that 30-kilometer-an-hour speeds create a much more forgiving environment in terms of pedestrian safety than 50-kilometer-an-hour speeds. The plan recommends speeds of 30 kilometers an hour along local and collector roadways. Examples of these type of roadways would be River Road or Spring Creek Drive. Arterial roadways such as Bow Valley Trail and Railway Avenue would remain at 50 kilometers an hour as they are today. To implement these changes, we would be looking for help from communities to identify locations that could be addressed through traffic calming and reduced design speeds, rather than relying on enforcement as a primary means of implementation. The blue stars on this map show locations where the town has received requests from residents for reduced speeds in their neighborhoods. On an individual basis, changes could be implemented with CAO approval, but before any larger scale changes would be made to speed limits, this would be identified as an individual project to be brought back to council for consideration. When considering this change and looking at the average distance between residences and the closest arterial roadways, reducing local and collector speeds from 50 kilometers an hour to 30 kilometers an hour would result in an average of 24 seconds longer for a trip by car. While reduced vehicle speeds will help to create livable and accessible neighborhoods, they're also a means of addressing overall congestion by creating streets that are inviting for some of the population to be able to walk or bike some of the time, and which will in turn free up roadway capacity for those traveling by car. The result will be a transportation system that provides people with options. The nature of the street can influence behavior and in turn how people move around in their neighborhoods. The town has an established framework for engaging on projects. Following the adoption of the ITP's 2018 updates for planning purposes, engagement would then take place for individual projects that have cost or community impacts, and council approvals would be required before implementation. Railway Avenue is an example of a project that is currently underway. To develop a concept plan, administration is currently engaging with the public and with directly impacted stakeholders. Once a concept design has been developed, we will bring it forward to council for consideration of the design and an associated capital budget for implementation. Engagement for other future initiatives will be ongoing and will be tailored to the scope and scale of each project. The ITP's vision is supported by the town's core values. In order to achieve the targets that have been set in this plan, The town will need to work hard to create an environment that supports increased choice for how residents and visitors are able to travel. As future projects are evaluated, decision makers should consider the social, economic, and environmental impacts of each project. Priority should be given to improvements that encourage mode shift and that are in alignment with strategies, projects, and priorities outlined in the ITP. Educational and promotional programming will be important for providing information to residents and visitors about new infrastructure and transportation options. The shift to more transit, walking, and biking will result in the better functioning of the roadway network, as opposed to increased congestion and parking concerns. And through this shift, we can create a public realm that increases social interaction, vibrancy, and our sense of community. If the plan is adopted for planning purposes, the town would proceed with the next steps outlined on this slide. And that concludes my presentation, and I'd be happy to take any questions at this point.
Thanks very much. And we'll talk more about detail as you go through the plan itself. Were you going to be speaking about the plan or detailing the plan?
I could if there are specific questions that touches on the high-level changes that are recommended. So,
any questions at this time? Just Mr. Fark?
Sorry, that was a mistake.
A mistake?
Yes.
You made a mistake.
Like Jeopardy, I rang in a little too soon.
Councillor Comfort.
Yeah, I just, on the last page before this one, there's a mention of the engagement on concept designs.
yes.
So what would that look like? And when you get feedback, is there a mechanism to show the public how their feedback has been incorporated into the plan or not?
Yes, there would be. So depending on the scale of the project, the public engagement process would look different. For Railway Avenue, we just had our first round of consultation in the middle of last month to gather people's experiences of how they travel along that corridor. That will be summarized into a what we heard document, and that will be shared with the public as we move forward with developing some concept plans. Those concept plans will then go back out to the public for feedback, and we'll refine them as we move through towards a recommended concept to bring to council.
And other projects would follow a similar?
A similar, yes, depending on the scale of
what it is
of the project, but there would be engagement associated with these as we implement them.
Okay, thank you.
So I just wanted to touch on the target for mode shift, and we've been talking a lot about that for a long time now, and it seems to me in conversations I have in the community that there are residents who think the target is to get people out of cars all of the time and to a large extent, and even in the winter months. And my understanding of the vision is, and I think is detailed fairly clearly, the 2030 target, which is over 12 years, just to reduce the share of the people using cars in the downtown core primarily from 80% to 60%. So we're not suggesting that in the future people won't be able to drive cars. It's going to be encouraging people to drive cars downtown less in the busy summer months. That's essentially the...
That's right.
Yeah.
Yep.
So I just hope to have the residents understand that's the target, not to make people ride their bikes in the winter or anything like that.
No, that's a summertime target, and it is about creating capacity as well on the roadway so that there's space for people to be able to drive if that's the most appropriate means for them to get around.
Thank you. And in the report, in the executive summary towards the end, it notes it talks about the 8th Street and 8th Avenue intersection improvements, which we talked about a couple of years ago here at Council, and engineering pulled it off to kind of reconsider. At that time, the conversation was around the entire Bow River corridor, the 8th and 8th corner being sort of a primary component. So if we're if we're able to move forward with some improvements at 8th and 8th, does that infer that the entire Bow River corridor will have been reimagined prior to that?
It would make sense to look at it on how it fits in on a corridor basis as we look towards implementation, and improvements along there would facilitate things like the movement of traffic and goods around the town center and people into the town center. So yes, I think we would be looking at that on a corridor basis.
Great. And just one last thought on that point. So if this is approved tonight, then is it safe to assume that planning would proceed pretty quickly on the 8th and 8th and come forward for some sort of budget approval for 2019 implementation?
I think we would be looking at that as a priority corridor for implementation, so wanting to earmark something for this budget cycle.
Thank you. Councillor Sanford?
Thank you, Your Worship. I have a couple of questions for you. Thank you for your presentation, by the way. That was very good. You touched on some of the issues that we have discussed in the past. One of the suggestions in the report is that channelized turn lanes and additional turn lanes will be discouraged as part of the reworking of the road system to potentially accommodate more bicycles. Is that the intent? Because I'm not really sure why that is something that we will discourage is accessory road lanes as opposed to, I'm not sure what.
Yeah, so I think that's in the context of looking at how we move forward with intersection improvements and so on. So for roads that have been identified as major routes to facilitate traffic flow, for example, around the town center, we'd be looking at optimizing the movements that need to occur. In other contexts and based on other classifications of the roadway, the use of space might be prioritized differently to accommodate more than only vehicular flow. So looking at enhanced comfort, livability, sense of place, and so on. So there would be a balance. It's not a blanket statement.
So I guess every redevelopment will have a whole bunch of challenges and a whole bunch of variables that have to be managed. Is that correct? Like if we're redeveloping a roadway, we're going to be looking at the traffic volume.
At a lot of specifics, yeah.
Yeah. Like you did around the school. There were some very specific requirements that were met and evaluated, and then
that's right.
the design elements were put into place to essentially address those particular things. That's right. So as we move forward with redevelopment, every concept will be evaluated in terms of the context of
the classification,
the location
of the roadway, what part of the network it forms.
Okay. So there's a whole bunch of variables, a whole bunch of recommendations in this report, but it will be up to administration to determine which spot gets which treatment.
It would be on a context-sensitive basis, yes. The report gives recommendations for how we should be looking at things as a whole, but each project will be designed individually, and existing characteristics will be looked at specifically.
Okay. There's a statement in the report that suggests that pedestrians count down signals to indicate when they will be given the walk light and not the crossing time remaining, which is essentially how we have our lights right now, or crossing time remaining. But the report suggests otherwise.
Okay.
So how do we reconcile those differences? I mean, we did actually try that on these new light configurations, is holding back the pedestrians and not allowing them to cross with the green, but waiting for their crossing signal to be completed and then showing them the countdown. But the report is now suggesting that we go back to the way.
And that would be a recommendation from the 2014 ITP, so that hasn't been brought forward as a separate update, but as we look at changes along Main Street, for example, and other corridors, how those intersections operate, whether it's through traffic signals, potentially applications such as roundabouts, would be looked at specifically. So
So traffic signals aren't our first choice in a lot of situations?
They may be appropriate for a lot of situations, and other treatments may be appropriate in others.
Okay. And you also talk about intuitive design. And that's always something that, you know, we always wonder what context people are coming from, that something might be intuitive. Because we host so many visitors from so many different places that it seems to me that something that's a lowest common denominator is what will be intuitive. But something really complicated is not that intuitive because they have to figure it out, right?
Yep. So agreed. I think in terms of new infrastructure that's rolled out, a lot of it is new in Canmore. It's new in a lot of communities. So education will play an important role as we introduce new treatments and as they become a more normal part of people's day-to-day interactions. I think we chatted a little bit before about some work that's ongoing right now involving the province of Alberta, cities of Edmonton and Calgary, Red Deer, Rocky View County, and the town of Canmore to come up with a design guide for best practices in the application of cycling facilities. And that's also going to be informing updates to the Alberta Traffic Safety Act. So that will clarify some situations that there's some ambiguity about. And ensure consistency as well between different jurisdictions across the province as these become more commonplace.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Fark, did you have a question or a comment?
So just two comments. One to follow up to Councillor Sanford's question. The other aspect of it being intuitive, you have to have sort of a complete network. Currently, we have segments of a network. We have a few isolated locations where we've been able to introduce these new elements, but they're not connected currently. So people are struggling to understand how they work because it's not a complete network. As the network gets built out, the connections between them will become more clear, and the ability to understand them intuitively will improve. But when you only have short sections of it, it is more difficult because you don't understand the interface between what is new and what is old. So although, you know, we use the word intuitive to describe the system, we're talking about it when it's a complete network and how that network will function, as opposed to the early concepts or the early iterations of that project. And then to Mayor Borman's earlier question, we're just starting to develop the budget process for 2019 and beyond. We do have a number of quite significant transportation projects already in the books, including Railway Avenue. So how soon we will bring forward improvements to 8th and 8th and the Beaubridge corridor is not yet clear. So I don't want to give the sense that we're promising that will necessarily feature in the 2019 budget. There will be some discussions that need to take place around that.
Okay. I have a few other questions. Try to move systematically through the report. In your report itself, one of the alternatives that was investigated was envisioning Main Street as a pedestrian zone. And you note that feedback from town center stakeholders essentially wasn't that supportive. So how was that? Do you know how that feedback was initiated and received?
I believe it was through the stakeholder workshops and public open house that was held in April of 2018.
I remember conversations years ago with downtown merchants around the idea of making a couple of blocks of Main Street pedestrian mall, and it always seemed to be 50-50. So yeah, I don't think we're done exploring that as a possibility. Just my thought. In the report, or in the plan itself, the ITP section 6 speaks about traffic calming. And there's reference to development of a traffic calming policy, but is it actually the intent of admin to write a separate policy on traffic calming? Or is it more procedures and other sorts of planning tools?
I believe it would be procedures.
Yeah, so the intent, first of all, we'll take guidance from the updated ITP, which talks about traffic calming, so that will inform the projects that we bring forward, and then it will be considered as part of projects that are being brought forward as opposed to a actual policy that would come to council for approval.
Okay, because the ITP references policies a lot. In fact, there's one page that's this whole list of policies that are going to come out of this.
Yes, and so a reminder that this is an update to the 2014 ITP as opposed to an entirely new one. So much of the language was retained, even though we recognize that we may be going in a slightly different direction now. What we tried to do was to focus on the updates that would look at the network itself and the network analysis and the design standards. So when it speaks to policy in the ITP, it's talking to the guiding direction that is the overall language in the ITP.
See, so I was concerned that maybe in administration or at least in engineering there was a different meaning assigned to policy than I have. Policy has to be approved by council.
That is correct. So if we're making a policy, it would come back as a formal council-approved policy. Everything else is either guidance from the ITP, or it would be direction that we would take and incorporate into specific projects, which would come back to council for approval.
Okay. Just a little nervous about seeing policy repeated so many times in there, but...
were you equally as nervous in 2014?
No. So more specific on traffic calming, the process that's described on the next page, which is a process, not a policy, well, it shows a number of steps that could be taken if a neighborhood street group or whatever wanted to see traffic calming on their street or in other areas. And I do hear from time to time people asking about traffic calming in the neighborhoods. So once the ITP is approved, that chart on page 45 would then be in place? Is that something that would kick in right away?
That would be the mechanism we would follow. This is the same as the process that was outlined in the 2014 ITP, so it is consistent with how we currently review concerns that we receive. We also have a traffic review and improvement group that meets on a regular basis to review operational issues from an engineering, enforcement, educational perspective and decide on what the best means is of addressing some of those concerns. So this fits in with those processes as well.
Do you have any idea how long it would take a request from a neighborhood group to move through that process? It looks like a lot of steps.
It is a lot of steps. It may depend on how much information there is already, if it's a location that we've had previous concerns about, as well as the number of requests that we have received.
And would it be the TRIG group that you mentioned that would operationalize this process? That
would have the initial discussions, and then engineering would lead the process of implementing trial measures and so on.
And does the TRIG group meet very regularly?
On a monthly basis.
Monthly.
Yeah.
So if neighborhood A put in a request for traffic calming in their neighborhood, it would be sent to the TRIG group. They would discuss it at their next monthly meeting. Is it likely that it would be approved in some way and implemented, I don't know, before a year is gone, or?
That would seem like a reasonable timeline. It would depend as well at time of year in terms of implementing trial measures, but again, depending on the volume of requests that are received.
Right. So it might be something like a year to move it through the process and implement traffic calming?
Perhaps from start to finish, and depending again on budgets.
He's getting fidgety over there.
It depends entirely on the request and where in the budget cycle that it takes place, whether or not we have any remaining budget for traffic calming measures. So there's no definitive answer to that question. We always try to accommodate requests as possible, but it requires some planning.
So that's a good point, budget for that. So how would that be handled for moving forward with traffic calming each and every case would have to come to council for a new budget, or?
That's not how it currently functions. So currently we actually have a capital project budget. I can't remember the number off the top of my head, but it is for traffic calming and complete streets, or safe routes to school and traffic calming measures. It is about $100,000, I believe, that is in that project budget, and it specifically is to address these types of issues as they are identified on a yearly basis. The safe routes to school, the accessibility issues, the minor improvements that are required, that are not big capital projects in and of themselves, but grouped together, they become one. So we fund those types of projects out of that budget line, as opposed to, because in some cases it could be just some curb work that needs to be done. It could be a very, very minor amount to improve accessibility. We're not going to bring those back to council. That would be a very inefficient administration.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I'm just want to understand the process, because I think in a lot of situations, some sort of traffic calming would be a really good thing to put in place and fairly simple. But I'd be disappointed if it took years for that to roll out.
Yeah, like I said, we have a process in place that already addresses that with a council-approved budget specifically for those types of projects.
Okay. Can't think of ever doing any traffic calming, implementing any traffic calming.
We do it every year. I think Claire can probably give a number of
school as well with the curb extensions and.
Pardon me?
Over by the school with the curb extensions that are there, narrowing pedestrian crossing distances and so on would be examples of safe routes to school and traffic calming projects.
Okay. Yep. It's not commonly done here. Yeah.
We do have some locations that we're looking at though, and I think we'll be back with
I mean, there's been lots of examples. Some of them are pretty complex. One traffic calming area is down, I can't remember whether it's 4th or 5th Street, where the one of the Spring Creek bridges comes over, and one of the streets was converted to a cul-de-sac to prevent through traffic going through as a result of some concerns about, but that was a significant cost project and had to wait for a budget cycle. I think another important thing to point out is that just because a resident phones and says they have an issue with or would like to request a traffic calming doesn't mean it's appropriate for the street, or will work for transit systems, or it will work for operational equipment like snow plows and whatnot. So there needs to be some thought that goes into much of this.
Right you are. I'll let it go. Councillor Comfort.
So to that, I would think that there would be some measures that could be taken as an interim measure to a permanent solution, like the signs that flash your speed and have found to be very effective for people to slow down, or signs that say children playing, or whatever it takes to sort of, if there's an emergent problem, I think.
There are different
you
levels.
could turn your mind to fixing those in the short term.
There are different levels of treatment, definitely, in terms of perhaps trial measures versus final construction. The example that Lisa mentioned was built to a final standard, but there would be locations and different types of treatments that would be more temporary in nature.
Right. So if, I don't know, this is the wrong terminology because people don't do this anymore, but I think drag racing is no longer a thing. But if kids were drag racing through a neighborhood, we would use all the tools at our disposal. So we would use speed traps, bylaw, etc.
We'd be looking at, where possible, addressing things through education and engineering as a first step rather than enforcement, but it would be part of a process in terms of reviewing the street, the particular characteristics, looking at what might be a more effective treatment based on the particular situation. So,
okay. Yeah. Okay,
but thanks. That might look like a variety of things.
Yeah.
I don't have any other specific questions directed to the report. I just want to make a note of saying that I think one of the most important, most telling pieces of information in the report is the graph around the implications of 30 km/h design that shows the risk of pedestrian death being at 60% if the speed's 50 kilometers an hour, and goes down to less than 10% at 30 kilometers an hour. I think that's a piece of information that residents should, it's $50. Anyways, I just think that's really important because it informs what we're doing here. There's a good reason to consider slower speeds on our roadways, and if nothing else, that's the best reason.
Yeah, we want to create safe and livable streets.
Yeah. Councillor Sanford?
Thank you, Your Worship. In regards to that question, are you using any kind of accident statistics or information to determine where there are problems with either visibility or speeding, or where people are not using the streets safely?
So we do, on a case-by-case basis, as we're aware of operational concerns that we might receive from members of the public through our TRIG committee that we discussed, look at individual locations. The RCMP does sit on that committee as well, so statistics would be available through them, but primarily the issues that we're addressing through that committee come to our attention either through observations within the administration or members of the public.
And when any of these new measures get put into place, is there some sort of monitoring or observation, early in the process as to how people are perceiving them, receiving them, responding to them? For instance, like at Spring Creek, was there some sort of observation of how people were actually using and interacting in that intersection?
I believe,
because that was the first complete streets project that we've
and as
initiated, right?
As we discussed, it is a new treatment, and I do think going forward it'll be important to emphasize those educational pieces, identify what's new for people, and as our network builds out and becomes more complete and makes more sense, people will have an easier time navigating these changes, but we're always looking for ways to improve as well, and where we can make things clearer, do more education, we're willing to do that.
And it is also the wonder of interns, is that they provide us a ready source of labor to do this sort of monitoring. So yes, we have done, and we do regular intersection counts. We have the traffic monitoring cameras in some of the locations that provide us with data. We do the traffic counters. So yes, we do follow-up to see what the uptake and the implementation or the result of the implementation has been. In the case of the current project on Benchlands Trail, the pilot project, we have a team up there on a very regular basis that are monitoring the intersections, doing traffic counts, timing the queues, and seeing how the impact of the pilot is, or if the impact of the pilot is having the desired result.
Okay. I do have one more question about the narrowing of the roads. One thing that I'm hearing from people in larger vehicles is that narrowing the roads, yes, it slows traffic, but it makes it very difficult to navigate larger equipment. Is that something that is that part of the input process, is how the road actually functions?
Yeah, so those narrowing or those narrower widths along roadways are intended to slow speeds, and that's part of the updated street classifications and some of the recommendations that you'll have seen in the report in terms of recommended traveling speeds along certain classifications, as well as lane widths and so on. So the intention is that it does make it less comfortable to drive above the speed limit along these types of roadways. Traditional designs have a lot of extra space in them, so it does make it easier to travel very quickly. The intent is to create an environment that's more comfortable for people walking, cycling, taking transit, and driving at an appropriate speed.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any other questions at this time on the ITP? Seeing none, thanks very much for your report.
Thank you.
Then I will move Council approve the 2018 Integrated Transportation Plan update for planning purposes. And I'll be happy to support the motion. It's another piece of planning work that's been building for years. There's been a lot of engagement, but given the constraints of our community in terms of physical space for moving people around, traffic, cars particularly, and the continually growing visitor base and the congestion in the downtown core particularly, I think the ITP is a really great piece of work and informing changes that'll make living in Canmore increasingly more livable, easier over the next 20 years or whatever it takes to implement. So I'm happy to support the motion at this time. Councillor Sanford.
Thank you. I'd like to just propose one amendment to the motion, and this amendment was included in the 2014 update, but somehow it's found its way into this document again, and that is on page 34, that in certain contexts it may also be appropriate to consider prohibiting right turn movements during the red signal phase. That's on page 34. It is a recommendation, and of course it's going to be at the discretion of administration, but this was removed from the 2014 report of having no right turns on red. So I'd like to see this reflected in the 2018 report as well, because it's in here and it was removed in the 2014 report.
So the statement in the report is simply that it may also be appropriate to consider. So that's not directive, it's just saying it may be appropriate to consider.
Well, it will be discretionary for sure. But I think that we considered that in the 2014 report and it wasn't supported. But it's back in the report. It's being recommended in 2018. So it has been reviewed, I think, by another consultant. So it was something that we expressed concern about in 2014.
Yeah, I don't actually recall the conversation, but it's regardless. We're looking at 2018,
right?
And I don't see that statement as being entirely directive. It's just acknowledging that that may be an option. It may be an option to consider. So I'm not adverse to leaving that in.
I'm not convinced that something like this would actually come back to council for approval.
Well,
because if it's an agreed upon recommendation, then why would it have to? Because it wouldn't particularly necessarily have financial impacts.
It's not an agreed upon concrete direction.
Well, in certain contexts, so that leaves it open to interpretation.
But typically, there's no implementation that moves forward from a master plan like this without further work and reporting to council.
Well, I'd like to make the motion.
Sure.
So if it goes, fine. If it fails, that's something that we've considered. And my rationale would be that it has been considered in the previous ITP, and now we're reconsidering it. But I don't think it's really the time to reconsider it.
Okay. And I guess I've already spoken against the amendment for the reasons I've suggested.
Okay.
Councillor McCallum to the amendment.
Well, I was just looking for some, I don't recollect, we've had a lot of meetings since 2014, mind you, but I don't recollect, do you recollect Councillor Sanford?
Regardless, it doesn't really matter what happened in 2014.
There was a motion to
All right, okay. So it's a report, and it's not a I think we've had this discussion, it's a third-party report to us. I'm not sure I'm keen to alter somebody else's work, primarily, but secondarily, I'm not a traffic engineer. And I do see the use of no right turns in certain communities, in fact, in vast amounts of Europe, because it's a tool of ensuring continuity of pedestrians in particularly heavy pedestrian zones. That being said, I'm not sure where this might be applied or how it might be applied, but I wouldn't want to hog-tie traffic engineers because I don't like the idea of it, or it was something in 2014 that was voted for that maybe we didn't quite understand at the time. It's prescriptive, it's one very small recommendations amongst a sea of others, and I don't think I would be able to support removing it from somebody else's body of work.
This is actually being presented to council by our engineering department, so it's their recommendation. But I think the point is still there, that this is only acknowledging that that's one opportunity that may be examined in the future. Arguably, the report could be silent on that issue, on that suggestion, and it would be no different if it was silent. It doesn't prohibit considering future possibility of limiting the right turn movements at a red light. Regardless, I've spoken to the amendment. I'm happy to leave this in, so wouldn't support the amendment. Councillor Hillstead?
I feel like we do have this in one spot by BP where you can't turn right on the one random light that lets you turn right towards the tracks. That is a no turn on a right signal, so on a red light, no one listens to it, but it's there. Got the nice cross through it's that one right by the bus stop. So yeah, it's a weird set of lights, but that is a spot where that I guess would be appropriate. I don't see a point in removing it as it is. There may be a situation where we consider it to be appropriate to not allow right turns. So because it's open-ended as it is, I don't see any reason to remove it. So I would be opposed to the motion.
Anybody else speaking to the amending motion? If not, I'll call the question on Councillor Sanford's amendment. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion is defeated with Councillor Sanford supporting the motion. So then we're back to the original motion to approve the ITP update for planning purposes. I've already spoken to my support for the motion. Anybody else care to speak to the main motion? Councillor Sanford?
Thank you, Your Worship. I will support it. There are a lot of good tools and good recommendations in this report, and I like the fact that there is an intent for public consultation when things change. It's good to know how the public will be impacted, and good to take their recommendations or their input during changes. And I think pilots are a good way to do that because you get to try it out on for size. So I think there are a lot of things in here that could be very successful and very valuable to the community, so I will support it.
If there's no further discussion to the motion, I'll call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. This time I'll take a 10-minute recess.
You saw me when I said I'll turn that off right now.
And then looking to item G8. Nope. G7, where's G7? Anyways, we're ready for you.
We're ready for me?
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Mayor Barman. I'm before you this evening to request an addition to the scope of the capital budget you approved back in December regarding the exploration of the Olympic and Paralympic Winter Games bid. And the scope addition would allow additional staff resources to be hired to redistribute some of the workload that I'm experiencing as a result of the bid exploration. So just quickly, what am I doing since you've appointed me to the BidCo? And I'd like to acknowledge that while the BidCo has taken a long time to get up and running, it is finally formed, mostly. There's still a few at-large board members to appoint, but it was formally announced last week, and it's had 2 official meetings. So that hasn't been as much of the workload. In addition to the BidCo meetings, there's been something called the Government Coordinating Committee that I've been active in, and part of that has been attending workshops to get government members up to speed, and working with our other government partners in the province and the federal government and the city to understand our respective roles. And that coordinating committee is something that will endure and will require my attention moving forward, but I wasn't all that familiar with the necessity to do that. Also, what I've been doing is working with the engineering team that's doing the analysis of the Olympic Village costs for Canmore and working with a landowner on the agreement for use of their lands. We've been, just last week, received what's called the government submission from the BidCo. So that is essentially the detailed capital budget for the project, and it's been submitted to all government partners. There's 2 days of workshops next week to review that with all of the government partners and the BidCo. And that is the initial submission that will allow us to start negotiating the multi-party agreement. So that should get underway shortly as well. And then I've also structured my corporate strategic team as an Olympic steering committee, and we're working every other week to meet and look at our own internal costs and resource allocation implications, so things like quantifying essential service costs, looking at our legacy and impact analysis, and reporting to council and through to administration as well. So those are some of the things that I am just starting to get busy on, and believe that between now and the end of the year, they'll require a significant amount of my time, so that we're proposing a solution of adding additional resources. So the proposed solution is to appoint the manager of human resources to fill an interim role as general manager of corporate services. And I know Therese Rogers is here, and you're all familiar with Therese. And I actually forgot to acknowledge Therese at the start for her assistance in preparing the report that's before you, because we had a short deadline and a window to get before you, and she was able to do that in time. And so how would she do that, and what work would she be doing? So sorry, to backfill Therese, we would have our HR advisor step into an acting manager role, and then we would bring in a resource within HR to help backfill that advisor role. So it's a bit of a domino effect. That's how it would play out. It would be for the 6-month term till the end of the year, or an earlier period should the Olympic bid cease to be a bid opportunity post a plebiscite, which has not yet been set for the City of Calgary, but the time frame is currently anywhere between November 3rd and December 8th. That is the window that they're looking at, that plebiscite. December 8th is the final date. November 3rd would be the first available date. As GM of Corporate Services, Therese would share in the rotation with the other two GMs as acting CAO when and as needed. She would oversee the implementation of the organizational review and change management, coming out of the organizational review. I think you heard some of that earlier today during the Finance Committee meeting, the implications of that organizational review. And Therese has been leading that over the last 6 months. And then, as we all know, we're also entering into budget, and the budget process takes a significant, and has historically taken a significant amount of my time. So that would be another role for her to step in and fulfill the budget, assist with the budget process. So just quickly, the review of where we're at with our current budget and scope. So there were a number of activities that we brought to you in December and requested a $200,000 budget to do, and we have spent approximately $113,000 to date. The columns there under year-to-date actual show that we've used very little in expert advice. I do expect that that will change as we get into some of the more complex negotiations that will get underway this summer with the multi-party agreement and the government submission and the land negotiations, etc. The public engagement is complete, what we believe is our work associated with the public engagement. There will be further public engagement and information sharing that will be led by the BIDCO. Our role through that will be to help coordinate an appropriate rollout and information for Canmore, but it won't be in actually delivering and producing the information. That will be a BIDCO cost. The manager of recreation secondment, which was a 6-month secondment, effective June 1st, the BIDCO has agreed that they will take on that cost. So the town of Canmore funded the first 6 months. There were a number of sort of administration type expenses, travel expenses and those kinds of things that also were funded out of that budget. So we've spent about $63,000 in that budget line. The Observer program in Pyeongchang, as you're aware, 4 of us attended, Mayor Borelman and I to the Olympics, and Sally Cottle and Jim Yonker to the Paralympics. The total cost now that is known at just approximately $20,000, so we don't anticipate there'll be further expenses out of that at all. And then what we're anticipating for the new staff resources moving forward, if should we go the full 6 months of this new appointment, would be $47,000. And that would leave approximately $40,000 remaining in the expert advisor category to allow us to seek legal counsel and advice as needed. So I do believe that that's sufficient to get us through to the end of the year. If it proves not to be, then we'll be back in front of you seeking alternative resources or funds. So that's all I wanted to say, and the recommendation is up on the screen, and I'm happy to answer any questions should you have any.
Thank you. So I guess you've addressed my question, my only question, which was around the cost of the additional resources required to backfill and all that. So 47,000.
So I should explain how that's calculated. There's an acting pay component that would go to the 2 individuals that would take on acting roles. So typically our policy allows for those individuals to be compensated at the start of the general manager level and at the start of the manager level, so they'd be bumped up a level, and then it would allow the backfill resource to be brought in for that probably a 5-month period by the time we recruit and post.
Great. Thank you very much. Councillor McCallum.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thanks for the presentation. So I'm just curious, should the November plebiscite in Calgary be a positive result for the BIDCO? Does that mean that you will be pretty much, this scenario will continue on until the IOC selects the host city in September, or?
That is an excellent question. I don't anticipate that as much, although just a bit of a precursor is that the organizational structure review that we're going through right now is recommending that we hire a full-time general manager of corporate services, but we would go through a full recruitment if that process came forward and was approved by council. That being said, the bid book, or the candidature file as it's being called, is due in January, and all of the work needs to be done and shared or socialized with the public prior to the plebiscite. So while I imagine that there'll be certainly work up into the plebiscite and potentially shortly after that. After that, my understanding is it becomes a bit of a marketing effort, and the bid team and the bid co then takes the bid sort of on the road and works through the IOC context and some of the other National Olympic Committee agencies, et cetera, to present their bid around the world. And that's much of the work that's done in 2018. Because of the new norm that the IOC is promoting under their Agenda 2020, there is a dialogue phase that will occur with bid cities. So if there's 3 or 4 bid cities in the running post-January 2019, there'll be the opportunity to sit down with the IOC if they have concerns about where the bid might be deficient, if they want further information or more detail. There might be some work in there if that actually is how it unfolds. But
And is that dialogue just with the City of Calgary, or will we have our own dialogue?
I think it will be with the bidco.
Right.
And then depending on the issue or the area that needs further clarification or more robust information, then they would come back and
Sorry,
work
so that's between the bidco and the IOC. That's not including, that has nothing, well, it does and it doesn't have anything to do with the communities at that point. It's where the bidco feels there's deficiencies.
Well, no, it'd be where the
IOC
feels there's deficiencies with the bid, right? If they want more information on, you know, a certain venue, for example, if they want to understand more detail about how curling will function out of the venue, then it might be that they need to do some more work with the venue owner that's being proposed for that type of thing.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Could you go back to the other screen where you list the work that you've been doing? Oh, no, go back one, sorry.
Back one more?
Yes, please. No. Ta-da, that one. So the review analysis of Olympic Village costs with a landowner agreement, is that in Canmore or is that in Calgary?
That's in Canmore. That's work I've been doing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And then the new, is he considered the CAO or is he the chair of the bidco? Chair. When will he be coming to Canmore to visit with council?
Well, in fact, he's coming tomorrow for a meeting with the Mayor Borelman and I, and he's scheduled, I'm trying to get him scheduled for a meeting in August when council's back in.
Gotcha.
Yeah. I just couldn't get him here today.
No, that's fair.
He's kind of busy, I think, eh?
Maybe.
Well, and our agenda was full, in all honesty.
Yeah.
So what we want to do is bring him, and by then we'll also have a CEO of the bidco, and likely do a full half day with council.
Gotcha. Thank you very much.
So I was curious to hear a little bit more detail on the 4th bullet point there around the government submission. Could you talk a bit more about that?
Yes, so that, in order for the major funding parties, the Government of Canada, Alberta, and the city, to to go through their approval processes, the bidco has submitted something they're calling the government submission, which is the detailed capital budget, and the operating budget has not come in yet. That's due in a few weeks. The intent with that is to have the various government partners review that detailed budget. So we have a 2-day workshop next week with all the government partners there to ask questions of the BIDCO, get more detail, find out if we have the information necessary to take to the decision makers. So for the federal government and provincial government, that would be to the cabinet, federal cabinet and provincial cabinet, to get their decision approved for the total spend. And now Canmore's total spend, we're not expected to contribute to the overall cost of the games operations at this point in time. We will have a portion in the capital on the Olympic Village, and that will have to come back to council for approval.
So at this point, they've just completed or essentially completed the capital budget?
That's
capital
correct.
Costs, and the operating costs will be coming forward. So that goes, that's now been presented to the BIDCO board?
No, it has not gone to the board yet. It has gone to the government partners.
Okay.
So it's gone, I've received a copy, the city, the province, and the federal government. Sport Canada.
And then,
and I should just clarify that that's to the administrative representatives for review and analysis so that they have the appropriate information that they feel is necessary to take to their decision makers.
so given the BIDCO's just started, this government submission would be entirely informed by work that the previous planning group had done, the city planning group?
That's correct.
And at what point would that be a report that could be shared with others, like the town of Canmore? Do you know?
I have it. I can share it with council in August. So I just received it on the weekend. Yes, so my intent is to fully share that with council.
So it's not held confidential?
It is a confidential document.
Pardon me?
So that would not be a public meeting that it would be shared at. It is a confidential document, yes.
Great. Look forward to seeing that. Thank you. Councillor Seeley.
What type of time commitment do you see this, 100%, or do you see it, do you have a feel for how much of your time will be spent with the BIDCO?
And that's interesting because it isn't just the BIDCO, it's the whole bid exploration, which includes the government committee, which is where the lion's share of the work has been currently, and not at the BIDCO board. However, I would say 80% of my time.
Up to now or in the future, you mean?
Between now and the end of the year.
But it hasn't been 80% of your time to date?
No.
Yeah. Councillor McCallum?
Thank you, Your Worship. Could you please repeat for me the question that, what was it, the document that you were looking for us to be able to view in August from the CAO?
The government
submission.
The government submission, excellent. So my question is that when will council be able to see first draft of the multi-party agreement? When will we see what it is we're committing to and what is being committed to us?
There's still a question if the town of Canmore will actually be a signature to the multi-party agreement. It depends on, the multi-party agreement sets out who pays for what. So I'm still trying to understand and who gets what. So the government submission is the full detail of all the costs.
All right.
But the multi-party agreement, absolutely, if we're a signature, and I think we should be, then it will come to council. The first draft is expected by the end of July. So likely
August.
during, if we could set up a workshop with council in August, then we'll be able to share all of that information.
And why would we not be a signatory to it? What am I missing here? If
It all
we're a
depends
full
on
and
the
equal
level of
partner.
commitment and the funding, right? So the Olympic Village, which is the lion's share of where our commitment will be, so the town of Canmore is being requested to put up land that is currently owned by CCHC, et cetera, and that will all have to be a decision of council. But that's not necessarily an Olympic cost, because we have the intention of putting affordable housing on those lands anyways. The catalyst of having the Olympics come to town is that we potentially could leverage the ability to build sooner, to build more density, to achieve some of the additional amenities we need for those properties in order to make them livable. But those would be costs we would incur anyways. So there's been some debate as to whether those are Olympic costs or whether those are, you know, our legacy achieved and leveraged through the Olympics. So there's a difference between what is a core Olympic cost. I'll use an example, and I've shared with you the bullet train from Incheon International Airport to Pyeongchang was one of the key legacies that came out of the Korea Olympics. That was a multi-billion-dollar project that will benefit Koreans for generations to come. That is not considered an Olympic cost. The Sea to Sky Highway is another example from Vancouver to Whistler, which again is an addition. The instigator and the predicator that resulted in that highway going forward was the Olympics, but it was on the long-range capital plans to be completed by the province of British Columbia for years. It
was the expansion of it.
Yeah.
What about the Canada Line?
Canada Line is another one, not considered an Olympic cost.
Interesting. That's very, very interesting. Thank you very much.
And just to expand on that, the expectation, especially under the new norm in the Agenda 2020, is that municipalities, provincial governments, and federal governments would not do projects that they would not, like the Canada Line or the Sea to Sky Highway, if they didn't intend on doing them if the Olympics weren't coming.
Okay, so back to the report. Are there any other questions from council specific to the amendment to the scope capital project? Seeing none, thanks for your presentation.
Thank you.
And with that, I'll move the council amend the scope of capital project 1764, 2026 Olympic and Paralympic Winter Games bid exploration to allow for additional staff resources to redistribute the CAO workload. And I'll speak to the motion. Happy to support this motion. It's when we established the $200,000 budget last December, it wasn't a refined budget, and it allowed for accepting contingencies, or we didn't know where it was going and things were going to come out of left field. So I think this is still well within the intent of that capital project. It's not a major change of scope. It's just a shifting of the dedication of some of the funds from one place, expert advisors, to a different place, which are in-house expertise. So I'm quite prepared to support that motion. Councillor McCallum. You're on. Okay. Let's try it. You're on.
So I do believe that this change in scope is definitely in line with the budget that was laid out in December, and I think that in terms of our corporate capacity, I don't think we would want to lose any of that during this period of time. So I feel that this backfilling is not only appropriate, but in my mind, was expected, and the choice of candidate perfect. So I will be supporting this, but I'm still waiting, and I'm just gonna keep banging on about what I said on, I think it was December 5th of 2017, that I am still looking forward to seeing how the Olympics are going to make our community even more livable. Are they going to provide even more affordability and understand how it is going to diversify our economy? And I'm still not seeing any of that. But in the interest of ensuring that the organization runs smoothly and that it runs properly, I will be supporting this motion because I do believe it's the right thing to do.
The discussion to the motion. Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. Moving on now then to item G8, the Canmore Eagles Deferred Payment Agreement. Mr. McKay.
Good evening, Council. Scott Mackay, Acting Manager of Recreation Services, joined tonight by Daryl Lockwood, President of the Canmore Eagles, here to discuss with you a few things related to the 2014 agreement that the town of Canmore entered into with the Canmore Eagles. So I'd like to walk through a little background and history, explore the Eagles' financial performance under the 2014 agreement, and then also present to you some details around a new agreement and provide you with a recommendation. Canmore Eagles Hockey Club has existed since the mid-1990s, currently playing in the AJHL. Provides a wide variety of community building opportunities and benefits in partnership sometimes with Canmore Minor Hockey, as well as other community organizations. And continues to exist with a great amount of volunteer effort through the Lockwood family and certainly many others. The Canmore Eagles have experienced some financial challenges throughout their time in Canmore, and they've been seeking creative solutions to that, one of which is through the creation of a partnership with a private company, Pinnacle Hockey. In August 2014, the Canmore Eagles had accumulated just over $150,000 in unpaid facility usage fees with the town of Canmore. And in 2014, the Canmore Eagles presented to Council a business plan and provided a request to defer payment of the amount which was owed. At that time, Council directed us to enter into a repayment agreement with some very specific terms. And that formed the six-part agreement, Motion 184, 2014. Of those 6 parts, the first part was for the Canmore Eagles to pay for all ice and associated for facility rental fees on a current basis. Payment in 2014 and 15 on a current basis was not achieved. And this was primarily due to administrative challenges, both on the Eagles side and the town of Canmore side. These challenges have been addressed and should not be an issue moving forward. More recently, the 2017-2018 season, the Eagles' fees remain outstanding. And they were proactive in approaching administration following a bus breakdown, asking us to defer that payment until they had such funds to be able to make that payment, which is expected to be submitted this fall. Under Part 2 of the agreement, the Canmore Eagles were to make the first payment on the outstanding debt on or before September 15th, 2015, and also submit a minimum annual payment of $10,000 plus accrued interest. Minimum annual payments have been made, reducing the amount owing to $127,000. And that's current. You'll see us flip between the 2017 financial statements and current in 2018 a little bit. We discussed the retirement of ICE rental payments deferred by September 1st, 2024. Minimum payments have been made each year of $10,000, but that pace does not set us up to collect all the funds by 2024. Part 4 indicated that we would not, the Eagles would not let total indebtedness exceed $500,000 without the express written permission of the town of Canmore. And the town of Canmore, and the Canmore Eagles are required to notify the town if total indebtedness were to exceed $450,000. And this refers to the Eagles' audited financials, which are submitted to the town annually. Their June 2017 financials indicated a total indebtedness of $552,000, bringing them beyond the threshold outlined in the agreement. Part 5, provide the town with annual financial statements by July 31st each year that deferred ICE rental payments remain outstanding. All statements have been provided, and I've included here a graph which outlines the financial performance between 2014 and 2017 to give you a picture of what we've seen from the financial statements. And then part 6, pay all outstanding deferred ICE rental payments and accrued interest immediately to the town of Canmore in the event that the team is sold or any of the conditions I've just outlined are breached. The Eagles have provided a letter from the AJHL stating that the last AJHL team sold for $500,000. And the Eagles have also indicated that before the sale, additional debt of $300,000 was paid, so that the actual amount paid for the team was $800,000. However, I don't have documentation to confirm the $300,000 of debt payment. And so we're recommending a new agreement because the breach of our previous agreement, the total indebtedness that I've outlined, has been surpassed. We've met with the Eagles several times to discuss a new agreement, what that could look like. And we're recommending a new agreement for council approval that has 10 items compared to 6 in the 2014 agreement. So the key changes associated with the revised agreement or the new agreement that we're recommending. Invoices. The new agreement would provide clarity around the timing of payment and process for missed invoice payment. So ensures that there's an appropriate interest rate charged for that. Total debt updates the total debt amount to reflect the current state of the Eagles of their total level of indebtedness currently of $552,000. And this does not include the $63,000 expected to be received by the town for 2017-2018 facility use. We expect to receive that this fall. Indebtedness, it updates the total level of acceptable indebtedness to $552,000, so their current level, based on their June 2017 financial statements. Financial reporting, it increases the frequency which administration will receive a financial report from the Canmore Eagles, giving us an opportunity to more closely monitor the level of indebtedness that the club has. And debt protection. On the advice of legal counsel, a general security agreement is part of the updated agreement and provides the town of Canmore with greater security with our loan to the Canmore Eagles. The new agreement also contains 3 new agreement items. One being item 2 in the revised agreement. In the event that a current invoice cannot be paid, the Eagles will immediately advise the town in writing within the 30-day invoice window and outline when payment will be made. And that is subject to a 4% interest rate, annual interest rate. Item 6 in the revised or new agreement would be to immediately advise the town in writing in the event that total indebtedness, including long-term member advances and a loan from Canmore Minor Hockey, were to grow any more, so past $552,000. And then the final item, sign a general security agreement, which the town will file as part of the updated agreement. The revised agreement also splits one of the items into two. Previously, the agreement stated that the Canmore Eagles would pay all outstanding deferred ice rental and accrued interest fees immediately to the town of Canmore in the event that the team is sold or if any of the above conditions are breached. We split that, and it forms item 8 and 9, which reads to pay all outstanding deferred ice rental payments and accrued interest immediately in the event that any of the above conditions are breached or if the team is sold. And then also states, in the event of the sale of the team occurs, payment of any outstanding amount plus accrued interest owed to the town will be paid first, so prior to any other debts. And that brings me to the recommendation for council, which is that council direct administration to enter into a new deferred ice rental payment agreement and general security agreement with the Canmore Eagles Junior A Hockey Club to replace the 2014 agreement. And at this time, Daryl or I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thanks very much, and Mr. Lockwood, thanks for being here to take questions. I have a number, and expect other councillors do as well. So not starting in any particular point, just a range of questions. So you mentioned in your report, Mr. McKay, the impact that it had to the team to have the bus breakdown. So I understand that's significant cost to the team to repair the bus. Has that been done, or is the bus repaired, or?
That'd be great.
Don't mind.
Thank you, Your Worship. No, the bus, we're currently trying to sell the bus right now. So last year, what happened is we took it in for its fitness test and certification, and they came back to us and said it'd be probably around $16,000 to fix the bus up properly. And then with the amount that it still costs for us for drivers and gas and insurance and everything else, we went from having a bus to going into a bus rental with Canadian Coach, Canada Coach.
Okay, so that contract then that the Eagles have with the bus company, you've been able to factor that into this agreement? It's not going to add extra stress? It's
I guess it would it was maybe a little bit of unforeseen stress this year. You know, it's kind of, you think you're going to go through the year and our bus bill is going to be X amount, and then all of a sudden you're back into a rental agreement. So a little bit more just got compiled, but we'll be ready, more prepared this year as a line budget item, knowing what from our previous year was going to be. And in a way, after 3 years of running our own bus, we really didn't have any agreements, so we were a little bit unsure on what our bus costs would be for this year. But now that we got a year under our belt again and going back into the bus rental part, we know that, you know, we're probably around that $60,000 a year for bus rental.
And that's factored into your operating budget, so it's not a extraneous expense?
No, it won't be. Just our budget is kind of our budget line, and so as always on any budget, we kind of move pieces in and pieces out, I guess you could say. And part of that is a little bit of in our coaching right now. We've restructured that, and so that's part and parcel of it.
Great, thank you. And a question for Mr. McKay, I suppose, the general security agreement that our legal counsel recommended. So help me understand what a GSA actually is and how it helps protect the town's interests?
Yes, so my understanding with the GSA is essentially we register assets that the Eagles have. And I'd say that currently the significant asset that they have is the franchise. So that's the key value in which we'd be looking to register. I'm not sure if anybody else has anything to add on that. Okay.
So then it helps protect the town's interests because we would seize the franchise, or what? I mean, how does it help?
Yeah, it essentially, it would, and please feel free to jump in at any time, it would restrict the Eagles' ability to get loans elsewhere, knowing that one of these assets is essentially spoken for, should, in this case, the town of Canmore, need to collect.
Dr. Cottle?
Thank you. In sort of plain terms, should the Eagles get into financial trouble and need to sell, the GSA makes sure that the town of Canmore's debt is paid.
First. It's like a lien or something. Okay. Thank you. So, could you describe, Mr. McKay, I suppose, trying to imagine the scenario that would lead to the Eagles actually providing a written request or a request for written permission from the town to allow their total indebtedness to exceed $552,000. So in the course of operations, you would know that next month there's a bill coming in or whatever. So the Eagles would recognize that when that bill comes in due, that would put them over to pay it would put them over the total indebtedness. So then the Eagles would come to the town and say, well, we have to pay this bill. We need written permission. At that point, it's a bill. I mean, it's an invoice. So the town, what options would the town have other than give written permission to pay that bill or invoice?
Yes, I'd suggest if we received that request or we were notified of that, we could make a choice to essentially say, well, we need to be, any amount owed to the town is now due.
So that forms a hard line in the sand. And through the last, well, since 2012, the first agreement, we've been trying to provide a lot of room, not wanting to come to that line in the sand. But so 552,000, which is the new number not to exceed. But that's the number, that's the amount of indebtedness the Eagles currently hold.
As of June 2017.
Oh, as of June 2017. And do we know what total indebtedness is today?
No, I wouldn't have a final number for you, no. But again, it's kind of, if I can kind of clarify, at the June 2017 time, no more money's just coming in. We really thought our casino was going to be in April, and we'd have that part paid, so the town bill got added into the June 27th. But between June 27th and that time, the deadline of June, or the date of June, that period of time until now and September, we have a lot more invoicing that goes out, so we pay other bills at that point in time. So that kind of makes sense. Like we don't have any more revenue coming in through April, May, June per se. So our load is still there for our bills, but then all of a sudden we pay down through August, September, October, November, December when our cash flow is good. Mm-hmm. I think the biggest part was the town bill brought us up over that 552.
Okay. So we don't know what the total indebtedness is as of today, so we're being asked to sign an agreement that references a total indebtedness that may have already been exceeded. I mean, is that possible?
No, probably not. It probably is what that number is, so it wouldn't be any more accumulated at this point in time. Because it's just wages right now that we're paying, and we're able to manage those through invoicing.
Perhaps I could add to that. I think a key part of this agreement that'll give us better oversight is that that it requires the Eagles to financially report more than one time a year, so that we have a better handle and can bring
quarterly,
that.
Wasn't it?
What's that?
Quarterly.
I'm
trying to remember.
I want to say it's, I believe, twice per year, but I'd have to double check the agreement.
Regardless, twice a year. Okay, thanks. Right. Anybody else on council have questions? You're welcome to jump in, because I have a lot. So, so, Mr. Lockwood, I wonder if you could just help us understand the relationship between the Eagles Club and Pinnacle.
Yeah. I guess Pinnacle was formed to give another revenue stream for Andrew Milne and for Jeremy Reach to be able to stay here and work year-round and make a living, for lack of a better term. It was evolved through hockey school, but more than that was they learned to be a Canadian hockey player, and that was formed through Larry Gale and Andrew, and it was kind of let's bring tourists in, bring them into the dressing room, the hallowed ground, and put them in hockey gear and get them out on the ice and have an experience of what it's like to be a Canadian hockey player. And it is a signature. It has moved to a signature experience. We at that time, two folds on that, because we knew where our indebtedness was to the town. We were not wanting to incur any more ice costs per se to the Eagles, so we formed Pinnacle. The other side of it was it just sounded kind of a different entity, I guess you could say, that it was this other business stream. We could see it between the Eagles and Pinnacle, and it was more for Andrew during that period of time. If it works, he would offload from us on our wages. There's the Canmore Eagles, and he kind of worked for Pinnacle during that time. After a couple, 3 years of seeing that, I think we need to bring it in under the Eagles umbrella now and sell it more as an Eagles thing, and that goes for everything. Through the whole process, the Pinnacle has evolved, and it's created, it was used to be the Canmore Eagles and a hockey school, and then Pinnacle evolved, and it's created the hockey school, the 3-on-3 hockey, and this learn to be a Canadian hockey player. So it's its own kind of business. It has helped to do what we wanted to do, and that was to offset wages rather than the Canmore Eagles paying those wages. The Pinnacle could make a living through the downtime, and but I think this has created a little bit more confusion than it needs to be, and I think we need to bring it back in under the Canmore Eagles umbrella, and we sell it all as that. And what's going to happen there at that point in time is, as we present next year, we're going to see a bigger revenue line there, because you're going to have the combination of the Canmore Eagles and Pinnacle, but it's all going to be under Canmore Eagles. So we should be able to take our revenue line up a lot higher, and our costs should be.
So currently Pinnacle is entirely independent of the Eagles,
mm-hmm.
And it's privately owned?
It is privately owned by Andrew Milne and a few others, myself as well,
right.
too, has been there.
And it contracts to the Eagles
Yes.
Club. Do those contracts, are they all presented to the Eagles board, and approved by the board? So you're suggesting that there's a plan now to roll Pinnacle in under the Eagles Club?
Yeah.
So would that, people, I assume, invested money in the Pinnacle hockey?
Mm-hmm.
And how would that, I mean, that's got to follow Pinnacle. So if Pinnacle ceases to exist as a separate or a private for-profit operation and becomes part of the non-profit Eagles Club.
And to be honest with that has never all been put 100% together, the Pinnacle side, because there has been this a little bit of a confusion on how we put that pieces all together. And so we've never really got to a signed document, I guess you could say. So realistically, it's easier just to kind of come back in under the Eagles at this point in time. But it's kind of about perception too. We didn't want to, Andrew was always a little bit nervous on that if the Pinnacle side was, making too much money and taking advantage, I guess, or the Eagles were taking advantage of the town. There was that kind of perception. He wanted to keep this Pinnacle part out there, that he was a outside ratepayer that was making, his living from it. And he didn't want to at first start it by bringing it under the Eagles, and then all of a sudden people are going, well, the Canmore Eagles are making a whole lot of money through this Learn to Be Canadian hockey player and taking advantage of the town of Canmore. And that is going to be something we're going to have to kind of figure out and work with. What is a part of the Pinnacle side that should be out of a profit rate paying side, and what is the Canmore Eagles rate paying side? And I think that is something that we have to, we got to kind of work out there. Because at the end of the day, we don't want to, the Canmore Eagles don't want to take advantage of town of Canmore either. But that's.
Yeah, and I'm really glad to hear that you've been considering all that. And I mean, the difficulty from our perspective is it's public dollars that we're using.
Yeah.
And I think it's expected by the community and generally supported by council to subsidize nonprofit organizations like the Eagles for the work they do in the community.
Yeah.
But then it shifts over to this for-profit private operation, and that gets really muddy when we're talking about public dollars. So just to follow through on that thought, if that were to happen, that Pinnacle would fold into the Eagles under completely non-profit organization, would there not be increased debt that would then accrue to the Eagles in regards to whatever the assets? I mean, I'm assuming the Pinnacle has assets, or even like operating businesses and assets. So if it's
no, there isn't really a whole lot of asset, because it is kind of, and for the Learn to Be is kind of a little bit of a work in process, progress. It really is. And it is through that whole tourism APT market. And it is a building part, and it can be from, it's in the sake of this building, it usually runs from in the morning from 9 to 11, Monday through Friday. And if it's a gray sky day and lots of rain, then people will pick maybe the Learn to Be a Canadian hockey player over a helicopter ride. But if it's a blue sky day and beautiful, we're maybe down to 2 customers coming in for the Learn to Be, and they're all on the helicopter. And it is part and parcel of that, just trying to get our traction there. It is work in progress, but we kind of feel we're, I know, lack of a better term, doing town a good service, in the sense that we're renting a chunk of ice at 9 to 11 Monday through Friday in the summer months that may just sit stagnant. So we're proud of that fact, I guess you could say.
You bet. Couple more general questions that I have regarding the agreement. You said the Eagles board has reviewed the agreement, or actually you didn't say that. Has the Eagles Board reviewed the agreement and the board is prepared to ratify it?
Yes, have it.
And you did note that, just one last thought here. I see Councillor Sanford has a question. You noted that the loans from the board members is reflected as part of the indebtedness?
That's correct.
Councillor Sanford?
Thank you, Your Worship. Mr. Lockwood, I just had a question for you. Is that ice time that you're referring to for Pinnacle, is that being paid for by Pinnacle?
Yes, it is, yeah. Currently it is right
So
now.
they don't have any indebtedness for ice to the town of Canmore?
I don't believe so, no.
And their ice time is pretty much exclusively for that program?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that ice time is not blending with the Eagles operation in any
No,
way?
because our Eagles operation for the most part is shut down right now. We're in between seasons, so that is, you know, in a non-hockey time. I do believe that, and Scott maybe will help me out with that, but there has been some post-dated payments towards that ice part that Pinnacle has paid. Is that right? Like they've.
That's correct. So Pinnacle Hockey is treated similar to any other ice user when it comes to the booking of ice, with the appropriate deposits, etc., required.
And has Pinnacle been showing a profit at the end of the year?
Have they been taking their profit out of their side?
Yeah, has there been a profit on
There
that?
hasn't been really a profit. It's been just, it's been covering wages that the Eagles then haven't necessarily had to occur.
So it's money in, money out, like the registrations are paying the wages and the ice fees?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, on the Pinnacle side, yeah.
Do you have another question?
No, that's good, thanks.
Just want to confirm one point. It's noted that through the last 4 years since the 2014 agreement, the annual payments have been made and the total amount owing from that time has been reduced. So that's positive.
Yeah.
I think you know that the real difficult part of this, I think for council, certainly for me, is around that relationship and between Eagles and Pinnacle. And I had been considering some sort of a second motion if the first motion was successful, suggesting that we look for a plan to show how the two organizations could be more clearly separated. But now, given your input and your suggestion that in fact you're already considering ways to merge both operations under the one nonprofit, that's sort of a 180 degree for me and my thinking. So I'm trying to come up with some sort of a motion to that effect that won't be onerous on the work that you are doing. I may have to think about that for a bit. But I understand from what you're saying that if there was direction from council at this point to merge, to at least explore the merging of those two operations, it would be not entirely onerous on the Eagles' part.
And just if I can kind of add to that, it is about how do we merge this clarification and create the clarification, you know, because it's been an evolving thing, you know, and just in history in the past was, you know, the season went for the season and then you just laid your coach off basically, and he would come back after 4 months and come back to work. And I just, through our whole business, that has evolved. And it went from keeping your coach on year round and to keeping on your assistant coach year round. And it's just the way the business has evolved in our junior A hockey. It's you know, it keeps growing in the sense of the cost for sure, and we're looking at that as a league, but how do we accumulate more revenue? And that's our challenge all the time, and we have to kind of keep looking at ways, and that's when the Pinnacle Hockey was kind of spawned at that point in time.
Yeah. And I understand, I'm familiar with the history of the Eagles Club and how it's sort of grown from its initial grassroots, and well, still grassroots, but it was just a vision, a dream, and is that 20 years now?
Yeah, 25 coming up.
So it's sort of the operation or the board governance hasn't changed much since the inception, has it?
Not a whole lot, no.
Yeah.
No.
Is that something that the Eagles board ever looks at, taking some sort of workshop in board governance and understanding the separation of duties, fiscal responsibility and all?
And again, it's a kind of a big business with a lot of volunteers.
Yeah.
And it's challenge in itself. It's always the same. Everybody has ideas and things, but nobody wants to put the work in. So, but we are constantly always looking at things, and through our league, we do get assistance there. Whether we're going to move into looking at more government grant process, because that is really out there. Other teams have had some success. We have our league AGM. They say, you need to look at that. Mm-hmm. It is about inventing our board, getting some new good board people on. Again, hockey is kind of such a passionate thing. We can get some board members there, but they want to know about the power play and the penalty kill and who we're trading and those kinds of things, and not the, as I always say, selling of the hot dogs and generate the money and those kinds of things. And it's hard sometimes to find the right balance of people.
Sure. Absolutely.
It's just one of those things.
Yeah, it's always the thing. And then you get a good board and people want to retire from the board and there's nobody to come along.
Exactly.
But I'd hate to see this play out like the Highland Games did, where the mm-hmm. organizing committee finally said it's over, we have to disband it.
Yeah.
And then the community stepped up and said, well, wait a sec, this is important to us. We'll get involved and put our own sweat equity into it. Yeah. It'd be nice if the community is paying attention right now and thinking, well, gee, maybe we better get involved and work with the Eagles to help.
Yeah, and for sure, and I think through our last 5 years of history, now there's a few components to that. Our relationship with minor hockey has gotten strong, and it's the strongest I think it's ever been, and it's so important to have. But we are seeing a little bit of an increase every year on our revenues, and whether it's season tickets and attendance, and Rome transportation has been one of the things that has been an unforeseen, but has really helped us out. We're getting probably upwards of 35 to 50 fans a game out of Banff, and that's from Rome. And Rome has stepped up this year even some more, and have offered you'll get a free bus ride if you get a ticket, and you can buy your ticket on the bus with the Rome transport. So they're really pushing that. And then the kids from Australia and tourists, from that matter, they will they'll see that. Caribou Properties this year is going to put us up on their telestrator in their hotels in Banff, showing they can go down on the Rome, come to our game, that kind of thing. So that will generate some more revenue, and at the end of the day, it's if you have a building of 100 fans, nobody really wants to come, whether you're winning or losing. But if you have a building with 500-600 fans, that's the place to be. That's the event. It doesn't matter whether you're winning or losing. People want to be there.
And I was really thinking more around the whole operation of the club. People need to step up and get involved, because the boards, you and a few others have been doing everything. You've been carrying the weight for years, not just financial component, but the work itself. So, I mean, council can't just keep every 4 years approving a new expanded agreement.
Yeah.
Sooner or later, it's got to work.
Yeah.
Or it won't work.
Yeah.
So I hope that the fans and other community residents are going to pay attention to what's happening with the Eagles right now. But what I was leading towards with that earlier thought was around when you have a board, doing training with the board. I mean, a number of the organizations that we partner with and are related to in various ways will do regularly some sort of a board governance training, and those workshops are easily available. And because people don't really get that when they're sitting on a board that's handling money and relating, particularly with public funds, that they have certain duties that they have to observe.
Yeah.
And it's no longer, it's just, Billy Bob sitting at the table and making things happen.
No.
Okay, that's my bit of preaching.
All good.
I've been watching the board. I don't see any questions coming along from anyone. Okay, Councillor McCallum.
I didn't want to interrupt your
free flow.
Cathartic free flow.
Free flow thinking.
Lovely Q&A, actually. I just wanted to make sure, so the bus money, as I'll call it, is the bus money going to throw the 552 up into beyond 552 land, or is the bus money included in the 552?
Should be included, yeah.
Should be included, yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
All right, thank you. That was my only question.
Councillor Mara.
Hi, thank you for your presentation and your answering our questions. I'm just wondering, does the Eagles receive any in-kind services from the town of Canmore in way of support, or I know at one time there was extra fees for cleaning because you had more fans, or there was extra cleaning. I don't know the whole thing around that. If you could just address that.
I think in kind, it's the work by the town of Canmore, from administration and everybody, and I'm not sure if they, in kind what that kind of means, but it's, I think there's a lot of work that's done by the town that.
But I mean, like support on like game day or.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
And like Mayor Borman just said, like a support helping maybe you write grants or.
Yeah, we just kind of got into that a little bit of a process for the seats, and we're going to work on a grant together. And so that, if that's what you're coming, yes, then there would be that. But again, that's.
But to date, nothing. No. Okay. Thank you.
Maybe I could add to that.
Yes.
To say
Okay.
the Eagles do have a different rate for ice usage.
Okay, that's
one of the ways. We also work with them on billing them when their cash flow allows throughout the season. So there is some
in-kind that way. Okay.
Support that way.
Thank you.
The CAO okay.
Can I just add one more
Yes,
thing, Your Worship?
indeed.
And I just want to thank Scott and Sally and Lisa and all administration for all the hard work on this. It was a big number, and to get to an understanding of where it's all at and things like that, and for us to look inside and see it, and for them come forward with a plan and working with us and seeing the support from yourself and council is very greatly appreciated. And really at the end of the day, the community is there behind us, we feel, and we really do appreciate it so much. So thank you.
Well, thanks for being here and answering the questions. There aren't any other questions, are there? In which case, thanks for your report. Just have to think about motions. I may just call a brief recess while I leave the room and confer with senior admin regarding wording I have in mind. Don't want to put forward a motion that is impossible. So, 5-minute recess. a motion to amend the agreement to reflect the discussion we've been having. So, yeah, so I'll move the council direct administration to enter into a new deferred ice rental payment agreement and general security agreement as attached with the Canmore Eagles Junior A Hockey Club to replace the 2014 agreement. And I'll move an amendment to the agreement as shown on the overhead. Add section 4E. Before the conclusion of the 2018-2019 season, the board will provide the town of Canmore with a report that clearly outlines financial arrangement and governance structure between the Canmore Eagles and Pinnacle Hockey. So we'll discuss and vote on this amendment and then back to the main motion. And I'll speak to the amendment. I don't need to speak much because we've talked quite a bit about it through the presentation, and this addresses, I think, the primary concern that I've had, and I think the rest of council, around that relationship, given that we're dealing with public dollars. You'd indicated, Mr. Lockwood, that this was something that would be possible to merge, so I think that's a preferable approach to some other options. So I'll put that out there for council discussion and decision. Any discussion on the amending motion? Councillor McCallum?
I think it's reasonable, and I think it provides a sufficient amount of time from a corporate perspective for the Eagles to organize that and to figure that, how they're going to do that moving forward. Because the end of the season's April of 2019. Yeah, I'm like, you're the hockey mom, right? So that's, I think, a good amount of time. That's my only comment.
Councillor Mara?
I too will support the motion. I believe that's where all the confusion is, so I think if we have a more clarification there, it's easier to make a decision. So I will support the motion.
Further discussion on the amending motion? See none, I'll call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion is carried unanimously. Back then to the main motion as amended. To enter into the new deferred ice rental payment agreement as amended. So discussion on the motion. Councillor Comfort.
I'm glad that we have a new agreement, and hopefully we can move forward to a happy, where everybody can be happy. Because it troubles me that this is public money that we are responsible for, and I'm uncomfortable because we, you know, when I look back 4 years, deeper in debt and not really seeing a way out. I recognize that this is a community asset. I recognize Canadian heritage of hockey and all of that, but it's still not my money. So I really want to see some progress forward on this, and I wish you all the best.
Yeah, I'll support the motion for similar reasons. This is complicated or difficult. You know, it's the third time that council's been asked to approve an agreement to keep an important community group going, because it is very important to our community. I think this time it may provide a wake-up call to the whole community about getting involved in making certain that the Eagles are successful. So I'm prepared to vote in support of this motion at this time. If there's no further discussion, I'll call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. And I will move the council be adjourned. Those in favor? Opposed? We're adjourned.